Chapter 120. 7 or 8 brainpeckers roared after killing Nick. It seemed that it was difficult to vent the anger in their hearts. Linda and Rant, who were hiding in the small building, peeped at the brainpecker beasts through the cracks in the wall. They were extremely nervous. Their heartbeat was extremely slow, for fear of attracting the attention of these bloodthirsty monsters. "It's okay, it's okay." Reed held the hilt of his sword as he prayed in his heart. "Brainpeckers don't eat undeads. They won't find us. God of light, please bless your people." Roar! Roar! The brainpeckers lost their target. They angrily wandered around the street. Their snake scale-like tails were swinging on the ground. Linda and Reed were relieved as they saw that the brainpeckers didn't enter the small building. But they didn't dare to relax. They secretly prayed that the brainpeckers would leave as soon as possible. In this tense and suffocating moment, a sharp whistling sound suddenly echoed. An arrow broke through the air and shot towards the small building. Linda and Reed were scared. They almost ignored the hunter who had been hiding in the dark. Damn! Linda's fingers clenched into fists as she heard the sound of the arrow entering the small building. Her body was trembling due to her anger towards Dean, but she still retained a trace of reason. She quickly locked the direction of the arrow. She raised her hand to pick up the stones on the ground. "Do you want to attract the arrows? Let's see if the sound is louder or if I throw the arrows." Whoosh! She quickly stood up and squatted down. She threw the stone in her hand. With a loud bang, the stone smashed into the opposite building. She had seen it very accurately, and it happened to hit a glass window. The sound was especially crisp. The 7 or 8 brainpeckers on the street heard the commotion and immediately looked over. In the next moment they roared and pounced over. However, Linda was stunned as all the brainpeckers, without exception, rushed into the small building where they were located. There was no time for her to think. The 3-story building quickly collapsed under the impact of the brainpeckers. Linda and Rant, who were hiding in the small building, quickly fell down. Linda's reaction was extremely fast. At the moment when the building collapsed, she jumped out of the window and landed on the other side of the street. She rolled over and climbed up without looking back. Red didn't have time to jump out and collapsed along with the small building. The stone hit his tall nose bridge and immediately rubbed it with blood. The blood stain was like a mark. The bloodshot eyes of the 7 or 8 brainpecker beasts locked onto Rant, who was in the rubble. They roared and pounced towards him. No. Rant was terrified. He waved his sword, but the brainpecker beasts pounced on him. One of the brainpecker beasts raised its head and bit the upper half of Rant's body. His internal organs and intestines fell down along with his ribs, and blood splashed to the side. At this time, the brainpecker, who didn't have time to share the food, saw Linda jumping to the side and immediately roared and chased after her. Linda's face was pale. Even if it was her, being surrounded by so many level 15 brainpecker beasts, she would die without a doubt. She turned and ran, throwing away everything that could be discarded, including some of the precious demon materials that she had hunted earlier. Roar! Roar! The group of brainpecker beasts roared and chased after her. After they left, a figure jumped out from the ruins of the opposite building. It was Dean. He glanced at the pool of blood in the collapsed building. His face slightly changed as he felt a bit nauseous. This was the first time he witnessed the scene of a monster eating a human. He could almost feel the fear of the young man who was bitten by the monster. He retracted his gaze and looked at the thick pile of stones next to him. The arrow and the blood bag tied to the arrow were pressed inside. He had to abandon them. He looked at Linda's 2 backpacks. One of them was bulging and exuded the smell of various monsters. It should be the valuable materials that Linda collected from the corpses of the monsters. The other one was her life bag. If it wasn't for the fact that the first aid kit was light, she would have thrown it away. Dean picked up her life bag and found a few pieces of dry food. He immediately chewed and ate them. He had been searching for monsters for the past 3 days, so he didn't eat much. He was so hungry that his hands and feet were soft. While he was eating, he suddenly smelled the smell of blood on Linda's body. He didn't expect her to be injured so quickly. It seemed that the group of monsters that he had spent so much effort to find were really powerful. It's best to kill them directly, Dean secretly thought. At this time, he suddenly smelled that Linda's smell was a lot lighter. To be precise, it was mixed with other smells. The smell was rancid and sour. He couldn't help but think of a place. Sewer. She ran into the sewer. Dean slightly narrowed his eyes. From the smell, it seemed that the monsters stayed on the street outside and didn't go in. Most of them were too big to drill into the sewer. I can't use her anymore. I still have to rely on myself. Dean's eyes slightly flashed. He didn't expect to attract so many fierce monsters but still couldn't kill Linda. The survival ability of an intermediate hunter was really extraordinary. He wasn't in a hurry to catch up because he smelled Linda's smell. She slowly slowed down after entering the sewer. It seemed that she was aware that the monsters weren't chasing and was taking the opportunity to restore her strength. Now that she is prepared, ambushes and sneak attacks will be difficult to work. Moreover, the previous diversion strategy has been used once. She shouldn't be fooled a second time. Dean frowned. Things had become tricky again. He had no chance of winning in a head-on fight. Sneak attacks were also difficult to work. Was it really the end of this time? Unless my archery skills are a little stronger, I'll be able to ambush her and kill her with a single arrow. Otherwise, if she manages to fend me off, she'll be able to close the distance between us in no time and kill me. Dean clenched his fist and bowed his head in contemplation. Archery can't be improved in a short time. Even if I improve the bow and use spiral arrows, it will be useless. The speed of the arrows won't be fast enough. They will bounce off. It would be good if there were guns. But after 300 years, the guns in the police station have long decayed. Even if I find them, I won't dare to use them. I don't want the bullets to explode and injure myself. Dean's heart suddenly moved. Guns can't be used, but bullets may be useful. The gunpowder inside the bullets can be used to make bombs. He couldn't help but get excited. The guns in the police station had a special storage room. The bullets were the most important and the security was extremely strict. If the bullets were still in the room, then after 300 years, the gunpowder inside the bullets was very likely to be useful. Chapter 121. The sewer under the ruins had long stopped repairing. The light was dim and the air was rancid. From time to time, the sound of iron cans or low blows could be heard. It was impossible to distinguish whether it was caused by the rats or other unknown creatures. Linda suppressed her breathing, inhaling and exhaling slowly, trying to minimize the movement. She looked around vigilantly. Years of hunting experience made her understand that the rats were not the only monsters that liked to hide in the sewer. Under the interference of the darkness, her vision became narrower. She could only see the outline of things about 5 meters around her. If Dean was here, he would be surprised to find that the dark vision was not common to all hunters. It was also one of the supplementary abilities of his magic mark. Linda's ears pricked up, sensing the lurking danger through the subtle movements around her, so she could not let her breathing sound too loud. Squeak! More than 20 meters ahead, the rats suddenly screamed in extreme pain. The screams soon stopped, and at the same time, there was a burst of splashing sound, and then it quietly quieted down. Linda's heart tightened. She was not sure if it was a few rats fighting for food, or something else hunting them. However, she did not leave. Monsters that liked to eat rats were not that strong. As long as she was careful not to be attacked by them, she would be fine. She stuck to the side of the wall and walked over with light step. She was always on guard against the gutter next to her, in case something jumped out of the gutter and dragged her in. After groping for hundreds of meters in fear, she finally found an empty corner. The road here had collapsed and a faint light shone in. The stench of decay was dispersed a lot. The bone-biter rats she encountered along the way all hid when they sensed her approaching. In terms of identifying the strength of the enemy, the weak bone-biter rats were even more sensitive than the large monsters. Linda climbed out of the sewer along the stones. The fresh air hit her face. She took a deep breath and looked back. Seeing that the group of brain-pecker beasts did not chase her, she was relieved. She quickly left the street and came to a nearby building. There were a few undeads in the building. When they saw Linda, they immediately roared and rushed to her. She didn't even look at them. She slashed out her sword like a whirlwind, and the heads of the undeads fell like autumn leaves. She found a place to sit down. Feeling hungry, she suddenly remembered that she had abandoned the bag. Her face became gloomy, and her heart burned with hatred for Dean. She secretly said in her heart, "This kid smelled my scent and got rid of the brain-pecker beast. He should know that I'm not dead, so he will chase me. When he comes to me, it will be his death." Thinking of Nick and Rona, she could not help but clench her fists. "I will help you to avenge him. I will separate his body and bury it in front of your cemetery." After a moment of hatred, she gradually restrained her hatred and calmly thought about it. This kid has a lot of bad ideas. When he appears again, he will inevitably think of new insidious methods. If he uses monsters, then I will hide in the sewer or go to the neighboring region number 9. However, there are not many monsters that he can use. Brainpecker beasts don't eat undeads. He smeared undead's powder and hid in the dark, so it was easier to attract them. If it was other monsters, then they would eat him first. This is too risky, so he should not do it a second time. If he doesn't use monsters and only relies on traps, then he shouldn't know much. Although he killed Gale, but it was a pure sneak attack, not a trap. Moreover, from the beginning until now, it can be seen that his effective range is only a mere 100 meters. Linda's eyes were cold. She was aware of Dean's shooting range. She wanted to improve her shooting range, but it wasn't something that could be achieved in 3 to 5 days of training. Especially outside the giant wall, there weren't so many arrows for Dean to shoot. The training efficiency was extremely low. Within 100 meters, if he sneaked an arrow, then I would only need 3 seconds to catch up with him and behead him. Previously, there was a group of brainpecker beasts chasing after him, so I had to let him go. If I knew that Nick and the others would die, then I would have killed him even if I was seriously injured. There was a trace of regret in her heart, but soon she thought again. He has no other way, unless he is really stupid enough to think that he can kill me with a sneak attack. However, instead of waiting for him to attack, it is better for me to let him attack and take the initiative in my own hands. Advantage is weakness. He used Gale's sense of smell to deceive Gale's judgment, so I can do the same. Thinking of this, a plan emerged in her mind. A whoosh. Dean ran quickly on the street, looking for the police station. Occasionally he smelled the smell of monsters, so he took a detour to avoid it. More than a dozen streets, but there is still no police station. Is the city's police station not in area number 7? Dean frowned. Suddenly, he saw an open space in front of him. There was a tall barrier, about 30 to 40 meters high, spanning hundreds of meters, and the middle part had collapsed. He did not know whether it was because of the rain or the baptism of war. Fortress? Dean was surprised. Although it was covered with vines, but the appearance left a deep impression on him. 300 years ago, when the disaster broke out, all the countries in the world built large defensive fortresses in the refuge cities. These fortresses were located at the city's various refuge entrances, and also the second line of defense after the national defense was breached. Now, as time passed, the old people died early, and the once tenacious and strong fortress had become mottled. Dean was silent after a moment. He suddenly thought of something and quickly ran towards the fortress. Close to the fortress, Dean suddenly saw traces of artillery and bombs everywhere on the ground. One of the skeletons, the army green clothes had long faded, and it was still holding a machine gun in its hand. Under the corrosion of the rain, the machine gun was rusty. Although the steel of the machine gun itself was rust-proof, but the nuclear radiation in the rain was too serious, and the other components of the steel had long been damaged and deformed. When Dean saw the machine gun, his heart was pleasantly surprised. This defensive fortress really had a lot of munitions. Picking up the machine gun, Dean gently broke the gun's shaft. He pulled out the bullet chain from the back of the machine gun. There were faint traces of rainwater on the bullet. He looked at it and quickly unscrewed the back cap of the bullet. There was dark gunpowder inside, but it could not be poured out. It was invaded by moisture and hardened in the bullet case. With regret in his heart, Dean threw away the string of bullets and continued to move forward, ready to go into the fortress to look for more. Along the way, there were piles of bones everywhere. They were all white bones, and even the bone-biter rats were too lazy to chew on them. Some of the white bones had small patterned snakes hidden in them, and their tails were exposed from the ribs. Chapter 122. Dean came to the front of the tank and looked up and down. The surface paint of the tank had peeled off. The heavy machine gun on the roof was covered with moss and dust. It looked like a layer of stone sculpture. I don't know if the parts inside have decayed. Dean's eyes lit up as he climbed up the tank. He picked up the heavy machine gun and threw it to the side. He lifted the tank cover and jumped in. Roar! As soon as he landed, a hoarse roar came from behind him. Dean had already smelled it. The dagger quickly turned around and pierced the throat of the young undead in army green clothes. He had brown hair and scarlet eyes like other undead. From his appearance, he was a foreigner. Ah! The undead's throat made a drowning sound as it softly fell down. Dean noticed the faded national emblem on his uniform. It was the emblem of the United States of America. He had some doubts but soon thought of a place. The Freedom City State. When the disaster came, the Western capitalist empires were the first to be destroyed. At that time, a large number of Western refugees were transported to Asia and entered the territory of Russia. At that time, the world united front and helped each other. The law of accepting refugees had long been abandoned. At least tens of millions of Western refugees were sent to Russia. The reason was that Russia's territory was the largest in Asia. Moreover, Russia's population wasn't large. The land area was largely deserted. Secondly, Russia had a large number of air defense tunnels built by the former Soviet Union. It was an excellent choice as a refuge. Did my father send the freezer to the Freedom City State after I fell into a deep sleep? Dean thought of the types of buildings he saw outside the giant wall. He felt that it was possible. Did the Freedom City State build the giant wall? Father felt that it was safer inside the giant wall, so he sent me over? But I remember that the so-called Freedom City State was a gathering place for refugees when I fell into a deep sleep. How could they build the giant wall? Even if they can build it, it should be in an area with abundant materials. The place where the refugees are settled is barren. It takes a lot of time to transport the materials. Dean couldn't help but think of another idea. This giant wall. Is it really made by us humans? His heart trembled slightly. He felt that he knew too little. At this time, there was a bit of hunger in his stomach. He woke up. It was not the time to worry about this problem. He immediately kicked the corpse and looked inside the tank. Dean was disappointed to find that the tank had long been deserted. The damage caused by 300 years of time was too terrible. Dean left the tank and continued to sneak into the fortress. With his sense of smell, he could sense the sleeping corpses along the way. If he could avoid them, he would avoid them. If he couldn't avoid them, he would directly kill them. I didn't expect these undeads to sleep. Such a thought flashed through Dean's mind. Soon, he arrived at the interior of the fortress. It was dim inside, but it did not affect his vision at all. Roar! A zombie leapt out from around the corner. Dean was prepared. He stabbed the dagger into its face and nailed it to the wall. After absorbing hundreds of cold crystals, he felt that his physique was not inferior to other primary hunters. Previously, when the dark-skinned girl and others were escaping, he found that he could steadily keep up with their speed. It must be known that the dark-skinned girl and others were scared to escape. Their speed had long exceeded the limit. It could be seen that his physique was even a bit stronger than theirs. However, if it was a frontal battle, Dean was still not sure. After all, his fighting experience was too little. Moreover, through this sneak attack, he realized that battles were not simply a competition of speed, strength, and other hard data. After all, no one would be stupid enough to fight you head-on with a sword and a spear. Terrain, weather, mood and so on were factors that affected the battle. They could even cause a reversal effect. After pulling out the dagger, Dean continued to move along the dark corridor to find a place to store firearms. Squeak! He pushed open a room. 3 sleeping corpses suddenly raised their heads slightly and gradually woke up. Dean did not give them a chance to react. He quickly approached them. The dagger penetrated one of the heads. He pulled out the dagger and quickly stabbed the other one. The zombie opened its mouth and was ready to roar. But it was pierced by the dagger and died immediately. At this time, the other zombie had fully awakened. It roared and rushed over. Dean quickly bent down to avoid its claws. At the same time, he quickly stabbed the dagger. Puff! He hit the zombie. The zombie trembled and gradually fell down. Dean exhaled. He felt some cold sweat in his palms. At the same time, he was excited. After dealing with the zombies, Dean looked at the room and found that it was a command room. The military insignia on the shoulders of the zombies were a gold star. They should be major generals. His eyes were quickly attracted by a map on the table. The map was very large. It was the map of Asia in the old era. Although many parts of the map were destroyed by the dust from the roof and water stains caused by rats crawling, he could still see the general outline. So, this is probably the Asian territory of Russia, Dean thought. Dean thought in his heart. He suddenly thought that there should be similar fortresses in other areas that had been cleaned up. The scavengers should have taken the map back. The people inside the giant wall should know the true face of the world and how vast it was. The things sent back to the giant wall by scavengers are handed over to the Temple of Elements for evaluation. The Temple of Elements and the Holy Church seem to be inextricably linked. The Holy Church's foothold in the giant wall is inseparable from the ruler of the giant wall. Dean's eyes showed some thoughts. The Temple of Elements should have mastered a lot of things. In other words, the top leaders of the giant wall should have mastered a lot of things. But there are some things that haven't been announced. What is the reason? Just because these things blaspheme the belief in God? He frowned. He couldn't understand. Even if they wanted to use faith to enlighten ordinary people, but there was still religion in the old era. The state also managed it well. Dean shook his head. He didn't continue to think about it. He put away the map and turned to continue to search other parts of the fortress. Half an hour later, he finally found the armory of the fortress. Chapter 123. Dean carefully looked at the rows. The firearms were arranged in an orderly manner. The firearms were piled on a metal rack on one side of the wall, and most of them were rifles and submachine guns. The mines were stacked on the ground next to them. There were 2 layers of wooden boards under them to prevent the erosion of the ground. But now that 300 years had passed, the wooden boards had turned black and rotten. Dean wandered around and found that although it was stored indoors, the corrosion of time was too terrible. All the firearms were scrap. The guns were not maintained, and the barrels were mottled with rust. They had become a pile of scrap iron. The mines were covered with thick dust. The load-bearing springs had long lost their elasticity. They were decayed and damaged. It was impossible to detonate the explosives inside. Even after 300 years of precipitation, the explosives inside the mines were likely to become hard mineralized. Dean didn't have any regrets. Everything was within his expectations. He found some grenades and mines as well as 2 rocket launchers. He was about to dismantle them when he smelled Linda, who had stopped about 15 or 16 miles away. The smell was mixed with a strange odor. This odor obviously came from a monster. This smell had long appeared in his perception range. It had been moving slowly and accidentally encountered Linda. I don't know what kind of monster it is. Is it strong? Dean thought. It would be best if he could directly eat Linda. As he sensed the 2 scents, he moved swiftly and quickly dismantled the landmine in his hand. The landmine was stuck very tightly, but the corrosion of time had caused the metal at the edges to decay. He forcefully pulled the landmine apart. Inside was a yellow mud-like explosive that had been invaded by moisture, like a piece of soft, wet soil. Yellow explosives? Dean was surprised to see the explosives inside the mines. When he was collecting information about black powder, he had seen other related explosives. This yellow explosive was one of them. It was equivalent to the evolved version of black powder, or TNT. It was powerful and stable. He didn't expect that this kind of gunpowder would be used in modern mines. Great! Dean was surprised. With this yellow explosive, even if Linda was an intermediate hunter, he would be able to kill her directly. Dean poured out the yellow explosive and scattered it on the ground. He broke off a small piece of the yellow explosive. He found a few pieces of waste paper and rolled them up. He quickly ran more than 10 meters away. The paper was mixed with too much mud. It was dry and hard. The burning speed was very slow, but it still burned inside. Dean looked at him quietly. Bang! Suddenly, without warning, an explosion sounded. The sound was extremely loud, and the ashes of the burning paper were blown away in all directions. Dean's eyes lit up. Although the explosives were damp, they could still burn and detonate, and the power was stronger than he had imagined. He immediately returned to his original position and continued to dismantle the mines, pouring out the yellow explosives into a pile. At this time, Dean smelled the smell of Linda and the smell of mutton. There was a strong smell of blood. One of them should be injured. Is it the monster or her? Dean's eyes flashed. The speed of disassembling the mines was getting faster and faster. When the amount of yellow explosives had accumulated to 20 or 30 pounds, he stopped dismantling the mines. He went to the metal rack and grabbed a few bullet chains. He twisted the primer cap on the back of the bullet. The black gunpowder inside was semi-hardened. He knocked it on the ground to knock some gunpowder out. He suddenly remembered the arrows and pulled one out. He used the arrowhead to remove the gunpowder from the bullet. Bullets were emptied one by one, and gunpowder was piled higher and higher. When Dean took out the bullets, Linda and the smell of mutton were separated. The smell of mutton stayed in the same place and did not move. Moreover, the smell was mixed with a strong smell of blood. It should be killed. Dean couldn't help but feel regret. But after all, this was Area Number 7. The strongest monster in this area was estimated to have not reached level 20. Linda was an intermediate hunter. As long as she didn't encounter some particularly tricky ones or was careless and sneak attacked, she could basically guarantee her own safety. Suddenly, he smelled a trace of blood in Linda's smell. It was very light. His nose twitched as he wanted to continue to smell more clearly, but the smell of blood gradually disappeared. He suddenly thought of Linda's magic mark ability, blood control. Is she also injured? Dean's heart moved. Although she could control the wound in time to stop the bleeding, but the smell of blood could overflow from the gap of the wound. This couldn't be covered unless the wound was quickly bandaged. In that case, he really couldn't smell it from so far away. Since she can control the blood, the speed of the wound healing should be very fast. At most, she will recover in a day or two. This is a great opportunity. Dean's eyes lit up as he quickly collected the explosive. While collecting, he firmly locked Linda's smell. Once she left his smell range, he would quickly follow her. However, Linda's movement speed was not fast. She stopped from time to rest. Dean was secretly happy. This showed that her injury was not light. Suddenly, he thought of a problem that he had overlooked. She knows that my smell can track her. She is likely to use this point. If she is injured, she will think of ways to get rid of me. If the injury is too serious, she will find a place to stop until the injury is healed. When he thought of this, he immediately calmed down and said to himself, "If I were her, I would definitely try my best to lure me out. As long as I'm near her, she will be able to catch up to me and kill me." Well, there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. "Since it is a trap, I will beat her at her own game." He opened the folding storage bag that was necessary for the hunter's wall. He put the yellow explosives inside and stored the black powder in his bag. After all, it was only used as a fuse, so the amount was not much. After the preparation, he looked at the arsenal. There was some reluctance in his heart. It was difficult to move the entire arsenal with his own strength. Sooner or later, scavengers would be dispatched to find it and bring it back to the giant wall and hand it over to the consortium. In the giant wall, the gunpowder is only used as a dye. Even the yellow explosives are used as a yellow dye. With the wisdom of the people in the Temple of Elements, they should be able to test the real role of the explosives. Is it because the explosives look like mud, so no one would think of using fire to burn the mud? Such a thought flashed through Dean's mind. It was not impossible. People's common sense would imprison their thinking. Black gunpowder was first created by accident. However, it is also possible that the giant wall has mastered the use of explosives. But after understanding the use of explosives, they treated it as dangerous goods and were strictly controlled. Dean thought that this was also a possibility. After all, this world wasn't the information age. It was very easy to block the news. Even in the old era, civilians relied on computers, TV, and other tools to disseminate information. They had seen it, but they didn't really touch it. But in this era, there was no such thing as fast transmission of information. Only newspapers. In the era of aristocracy, it was very difficult for newspapers to play a role. The things that could be reported were extremely limited. In any case, if the giant wall has mastered explosives, then there should be records in the alchemist's circle. But there is no mention of it in Roseyard's notes. Anyway, I will go back and inquire about it. Dean no longer thought about it. He carried his bag and storage bag and turned away to start his own hunting operation. Chapter 124. In a small building by the street that was covered in crack, Linda was sitting in the dark. She opened the first aid kit and replaced the gauze on her right arm and thigh. At the same time, she was vigilant of the surroundings in case of a sneak attack. "I don't believe that you won't be fooled by my disguise," Linda secretly said in her heart. In order to make the trap more realistic, she deliberately went to the place where the beast liked to move. Her purpose was to use the beast's claws to hurt herself. The beast's hunting level was 17. It was an amphibious monster. Compared to the land, it preferred to move in the water. If it fought in the water, even a senior hunter would be bitten and eaten by it. But on the land, its combat effectiveness would be weakened a lot. With Linda's hunting experience and strength, she could basically hunt it alone as long as she was careful. In order to make the performance realistic, she always went all out. In fact, with the strength of the beast, even if she tried her best, it would be extremely difficult to defeat it. Therefore, she was confident that her disguise was absolutely not a problem. The next step was to see whether Dean had enough courage or not. After replacing the new gauze, she felt that the wounds on her right arm and thigh were still somewhat numb. She couldn't help but hate in her heart. The claws of the beast had paralysis toxins. It was an extremely difficult monster to deal with. If she couldn't control the blood flow and expel the toxins to a large extent, she was afraid that her right arm and thigh would be stiff and unable to move. "When I catch you, I will inflict this pain 100 times or 1,000 times. Her heart was full of killing intent. She transferred all her hatred to Dean. She couldn't wait to peel his skin and pull out his tendons. While she was furious, she controlled the blood flow on her face to recede, making her face look a little pale, especially her lips, which were almost bloodless. She looked extremely weak. She slowly leaned against the wall, panting softly. Her hand was tightly gripping her one-handed sword, constantly on guard. But compared to her weak appearance, such vigilance seemed so futile. Whoosh! Suddenly, a cold arrow was shot from the window. The angle of the arrow was diagonally downward, aiming straight at her throat. The eyes of the dying Linda suddenly burst out. She suddenly stood up and waved her sword to block the arrow. Her target was instantly locked on the place where the arrow came from, the opposite building. Die! She did not hide her strong killing intent and jumped out of the window like a cheetah towards the opposite building. However, just as she arrived in front of the small building, her eyelids suddenly twitched. She felt a bit of fear in her heart. This was the instinct of many years of hunting. She instinctively felt a trace of fear in the bottom of her heart, and immediately stopped her body. Raising her head, she looked at the window where the arrow came from. Dean was no longer there. It seemed that he had escaped. She wasn't in a hurry to chase after him. Instead, she stared at him carefully. After a while, she suddenly said, "Don't hide anymore. I know you're inside. There should be an ambush there, right?" There was no sound from the window. "The fact that you've endured for so long means that you know that once you're exposed, I'll immediately catch up to you and kill you," Linda coldly said. "Although my disguise is very realistic, but with your temperament, you should be prepared before attacking me. After all, my wound has just been infected. It will take at least a day for me to recover. With your cautiousness, you shouldn't be in such a hurry to attack me." At the same time, she calmed down. Her mind had been affected by her own subjective thoughts, but now that she was thinking from the other's point of view, she could see things more clearly. There was still no movement from the window. Linda frowned. Was she thinking too much? Did he really run away? Thinking of this, her heart was a little uncomfortable. If she really let him go, then wouldn't her injuries be in vain? "Don't pretend I know you're inside." Linda didn't give up and continued, "You're hiding inside to lure me in. It means that your trap is arranged inside. But don't forget, even if I don't kill you this time, I will have the opportunity to kill you in the future. When your training period is over, you will die." Seeing that there was still no response from the window, her heart was filled with anger, but she tried to restrain herself. She sneered, "Then let's see whose patience is better." After that, she went back to her small building and sat down. She thought, "I don't believe that he is not anxious. He wants to kill me. This is the place where I can use the initiative. As long as he wants to act, he will be exposed." She sat down and rested while staring at the opposite small building. Gradually, her heart became a little irritated. She was a dignified intermediate hunter, but she had to be careful and vigilant against a rookie. She was angry and resentful. After all, it was very exhausting to be on guard against sneak attacks. However, she still held back her impatience and thought about other plans in her mind. As time went by, there was still no movement from the opposite small building. She thought, "Let's see who can afford to waste time." In the blink of an eye, it was night time. Her spirit became more vigilant. The night was the best for sneak attack. Her field of vision was compressed too short. She had to be 120% vigilant. In the middle of the night, she gradually felt a trace of sleepiness. When she felt tired, she suddenly woke up. Although she was an intermediate hunter, she wouldn't be able to bear it. After all, the other side could stay in the dark and relax, but she was always on high alert. She would be exhausted in a few days. She suddenly understood Dean's plan. That was to exhaust her to death. If these words were spread out, it was estimated that no one would believe it. A junior hunter was planning to exhaust an intermediate hunter. It sounded incredible, But such a thing happened in front of her. No, I have to replenish my spirit. Linda came to the corridor under the small building and found a corner to sit down. She leaned against the wall. There was no angle for arrows to fly around. This made her tense spirit slightly relaxed. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Although she was asleep, she often mingled outside the giant wall. She would wake up if there was any movement. Therefore, she wasn't worried about Dean's sneak attack. The night passed calmly. Linda woke up and saw the morning light shining outside. She didn't expect that Dean wouldn't attack again. Was she worried too much in the afternoon? She was a little annoyed in her heart. Even if there was a trap inside, he was just a rookie. How much lethality could it have? She knew that she would worry too much, mainly because Dean's previous performances were too amazing, so she had to treat him with caution. However, after thinking about it carefully, the other side was a child after all, and had never hunted. Even if he had a lot of tricks, his temperament was still too poor. Perhaps he really saw her weak appearance, and could not help but make a move? She was annoyed and slashed the wall next to her. Her heart was full of self-blame and anger. Her painstakingly planned plan was missed by her. I'd like to see what kind of trap you have arranged, damn kid. She looked at the small building and walked over with her sword. As soon as she entered the small building, a faint smell of dampness and decay hit her face. The surroundings were dim, but there was a faint light coming in from the cracks in the walls and the windows. With the help of the faint light, her vision was not greatly affected. She looked around, looking for traps. Although she was not a thief, but after all, she was an intermediate hunter. She was very experienced and had seen a lot of traps. Moreover, Rowling often arranged traps in the team. She also saw some doorways. At the moment, on the top of the third floor of the small building, a figure was leaning against the wall. It was Dean. After the failed sneak attack yesterday, he didn't leave the small building. After all, this was the place where he ambushed the explosives. Once he left here, it would be more dangerous. When Linda called him downstairs, he wanted to provoke her. But then he thought that with the other party's rich experience, she should know how to control her emotions. Instead of using anger, it was better to use curiosity. Therefore, no matter how Linda called him, he didn't make a sound. His purpose was to deliberately mystify the other party and affect her judgment. However, to his disappointment, Linda didn't come in. Just when he thought that the ambush plan had failed and was thinking about other new plans, he didn't expect to hear the other party enter the building. She should still want to confirm whether I have left or not. It seems that she is a good hunter. Even if she can suppress her anger, she still can't resolve it. There was a trace of excitement in Dean's eyes as he quickly came to the prepared place. Linda came to the second floor along the collapsed stairs. She glanced around, but still didn't see any traps. This made her more and more angry, as if she was being played. Suddenly, she heard a subtle hissing sound as if dozens of vipers were spitting out their tongues. Using the monsters again? Linda was startled, but the next moment her eyes lit up. He is still here. She clenched her sword and was ready to go to the third floor. Although she had considered the ambush, but her magic marks could restrain some poisonous monsters. Even if she couldn't beat them, she could still escape. Just when she was halfway to the third floor, vain boom! The sudden violent explosion instantly drowned the entire small building. From the first floor to the third floor, everything was blown up. Chapter 125. Countless stones splashed, and the sound of the explosion was like thunder, deafening to the ears. The small building that was on the verge of collapse was instantly razed to the ground, leaving only some scattered rocks in its place. The two neighboring buildings on the left and right were also affected by the explosion, and half of them collapsed from the impact. The smell of gunpowder spread in the air. Clang! Dean climbed out of the collapsed building and looked up at the flattened building. He was shocked. He did not expect the destructive power of the yellow explosives to be so amazing. Fortunately, he ignited the fuse and jumped out of the building in time. Otherwise, he would have been buried with them. His nose gently sniffed and soon smelled the strong smell of blood coming from Linda's body. The source of the smell came from the pile of stones under the building. He got up and shook off the dust on his body. He was ready to move the stones to check whether she was alive or not. Suddenly he remembered the last time he ate a loss, and stopped his footsteps. He thought that if she was still alive, she should be lying in ambush, waiting for him to move the stones and check the body to give a fatal blow. Thinking of this, Dean turned and left. After a moment, he came back with some cloth and withered plants in his hand. He threw them in front of the pile of stones, and then lit a torch and threw it. The torch quickly burned the dry wood and the cloth. The fire was strong and blazing. After more than 10 minutes, the fire burned out and ashes were everywhere. Dean looked at it. The flame only burned the outside of the stone, and only a few fell inside. If she was determined to endure, she should be able to bear it. He immediately turned away, and took out 2 yellow explosives that were set in another small building on the opposite side. The 2 yellow explosives were sealed by the concave stone shell and soil, leaving only a paper rolled up fuse exposed. Dean was about to throw one of the yellow explosives, but suddenly thought of something. He was scared and cold sweat came out of his back. He quickly turned away and went to a corner. He broke the gap between the stone shell and the soil, and took out the yellow explosives inside. Then he picked up the water on the ground and sewed it back to its original state. After doing this, he returned to the pile of stones again and lit the fuse of the yellow explosive shell. He waited for it to burn until it was only 10 centimeters away, then he threw it to the pile of stones. The explosives rolled on the stone floor, and the gap between the newly glued soil and the stone shell cracked a little. Seeing that the fuse was about to burn into the stone shell, the rubble was suddenly pushed away, and a bloody figure jumped out from inside, quickly grabbed the yellow explosives, and threw it backhand at Dean's face. Dean's heart tightened. He quickly raised his hand to block the yellow explosive. The fuse was slightly late, so the stone shell did not explode. Dean threw it away and gloomily looked at the bloody figure in front of him. It was Linda. Her left arm was broken from the elbow. Her armor was blown up and the fragments were embedded in her body. She gasped and stared at Dean. There were several burn marks on her face. Apparently, Dean's firewood fell through the cracks in the rocks and fell on her face. But she refrained from making a sound. Dean saw her ghost-like appearance, and his heart turned cold. Such endurance was completely beyond his imagination. It made him realize how terrible the existence of an intermediate hunter was. These thoughts flashed in Dean's mind. He threw away the empty shell of the yellow explosives and quickly held the black bow, nocked an arrow and aimed at the target. Whoosh! The arrow quickly shot out. At the moment, the distance between the two was less than 10 meters, and the speed of the arrow was extremely fast. Linda saw Dean throw away the stone shell and was startled. Although she didn't know what it was, but the familiar hissing sound showed that it was the thing that injured her. Why was there no sound at the moment when it was in Dean's hand? While she was in a daze, an arrow flew towards her. She hurriedly dodged, but her legs were too heavily injured. The arrow immediately hit her in the side of her abdomen, and the strong force sent her body flying backwards, causing her to fall to the ground. As for her one-handed sword, it was blown away by the explosion, and she didn't know where it fell. Dean quickly put the second arrow and continued to shoot. Puff! Another hit, and it hit Linda's shoulder. Dean was merciless, and continued to put the third arrow, aiming at her forehead. Linda used all her strength, and hurriedly dodged sideways, and the arrow brushed past her face. Dean frowned, and continued to backhand to pull out the arrow, but the arrow was empty. Linda turned back and noticed the scene. There was a trace of a gloomy smile on her face. "Little devil, if you want to kill me, then let's die together." She raised her hand to pull out the arrow from her side abdomen, and staggered to stand up. She took a deep breath and quickly ran towards Dean. Dean didn't choose to escape. At this moment, Linda burst out with speed, and no matter how he ran, she would catch up. He stood in the same place and stared at her. When the distance between the two reached 3 meters, he suddenly raised his arm. Whoosh! A shadow was thrown out from the palm of his hand. Puff! Blood sputtered out. Linda, who was running at full speed, suddenly leaned back and fell to the ground. There was a dagger in her throat. In such a short distance, the speed of Dean's dagger was not inferior to the speed of the arrow, so Linda couldn't react. After all, her injury was too serious. Unless she immediately returned to the wall for treatment, otherwise even if Dean didn't make a move, she would die outside the wall. Gurgling. Blood gurgled out of Linda's mouth, and her body trembled. This was the instinct of suffocation when her trachea was blocked by blood. Dean didn't approach her, but came to the side of the stone pile, and picked up a few stones to throw at her. Linda's body trembled, and her eyes moved with difficulty. She stared at him, and her mouth slightly opened, full of anger and resentment. Dean frowned. You and your brother are quite similar. When your brother died, he was unwilling. Oh, I forgot to tell you, in fact, I also killed your brother. Linda's eyes suddenly widened, and her emotions were agitated. Her throat muscles were affected, and she coughed out a big mouthful of blood. Her mouth issued a whining sound, as if she was cursing, but also like crying in grief and indignation. She raised her arms to grab Dean's direction, but her body was too injured, so she couldn't stand up. Eventually, her arms were stiff in midair, and powerlessly slipped down. Dean carefully looked at her, and felt that this time it wasn't a fake. He immediately picked up a big stone and carefully approached her. When the distance was 2 or 3 meters apart, he smashed the stone on her head. Bang! Seeing that she still didn't respond, he was a little relieved. He quickly bent down and pressed the dagger in her throat. He swayed it left and right, and completely cut off her throat and trachea. However, this time Linda was really dead, and her body didn't have any reaction. Dean was completely relieved, and his tense body loosened. He felt his back was drenched in cold sweat, and immediately sat on the ground, gasping for breath. After a while, his physical strength recovered a little, and he found some withered plants to incinerate Linda's body. Chapter 126. After disposing of Linda's body, Dean found her one-handed sword from the pile of stones and left. He found a lake along the way. There were some huge shadows swimming in the lake. He raised the one-handed sword and threw it into the lake. The body was destroyed and the sword sank. Dean clapped his hands. Even if the consortium's investigation team found some clues, they wouldn't know that he was the one who did it. As for the others, they were killed by Brainpecker. The only one he shot was Gale. He had already smelled him through the smell. He knew that Gale had been incinerated by the Dark Girl and others. It's time to go back to the giant wall. Dean turned and left. He had stayed outside the giant wall for too long. Moreover, when he attacked Gale, he was soaked in a pool full of rainwater. He didn't need to think to know that the radiation infection on his body was extremely serious. However, if it did not reach a certain level, the mutation brought about by the nuclear radiation would not be visible on the surface. When the radiation content had accumulated to more than 10%, the body would slowly show radiation black spots like the ordinary people in the slums, or some parts of the skin would age, wrinkle, and even ulcerate. Moreover, in serious cases it would lead to sterilization. However, before leaving, Dean once again went back to the fortress. He picked out a few slightly intact firearms from the arsenal. In addition, he picked out mines, grenades, artillery, and other things. He threw them into the storage bag and sent them to the 9th region. Along the way, he relied on his sense of smell to avoid danger. Basically, he didn't encounter any danger. After all, most of the monsters in the 7th region had been cleaned up. The ferocious monsters had long been killed by the first batch of hunting teams. The rest of the monsters had strong survival abilities. After returning to the 9th region, Dean found the place where he previously hid the black bow. He found that no one was aware of it. He immediately took out the black bow and 200 cold crystals. What surprised him was that the cold crystals were still intact after being hidden for more than 2 months. There was no sign of melting. Dean took the black bow and continued to hide the firearms, mines and other things inside. As for the cold crystals, he only kept 100. With his current strength, it wasn't difficult to hunt the undeads. Keeping 100 cold crystals was convenient for future research when he built a secret stronghold outside the giant wall. After covering the storage place, Dean carried the rest of the cold crystals and left the 9th region. He went to the giant wall passage. Halfway there, it started to rain. Dean immediately went into a nearby broken building to take shelter from the rain. After the rain stopped, he found some large leafy plants and weaved them into a raincoat to prevent him from getting wet while waiting in front of the giant wall. Dean quickly found the passage when he returned to the giant wall. However, the passage was locked from the inside. The layer of iron plate was extremely thick. Even if he used brute force, it would be difficult to break it. He felt that even Glenn wouldn't be able to open it. Dean sat next to the passage and waited. This was the fate of hunters and scavengers who did not return on time. They could only wait until the next time the passage opened before they could enter together. Dean only hoped that the giant wall would send scavengers as soon as possible. Dean was not idle while waiting. He had thought of the spiral arrow when he was sneak attacking, but he knew that it was very difficult to learn how to shoot spiral arrow. Spiral arrow could improve the destructive power and penetrating power, but the shooting trajectory was different from ordinary arrows. It was affected by the airflow and was easy to deviate. Anyway, it's better to practice spiral arrow than continuous arrow, Dean said in his heart. The destructive power of spiral arrow and ordinary arrow was like the difference between armor-piercing bullets and bullet. The destructive power of spiral arrow was at least doubled or even doubled or tripled. Of course, if time allowed, he could master spiral arrow and superimpose continuous arrow. The lethality would be even more terrible. However, with such difficulty, it was estimated that it would be difficult to master without 3 to 5 years of practice. Dean decided to practice spiral arrow first. Through this hunt, he increasingly felt that accuracy was too important for a hunter. If he missed when he sneak attacked Gale, then the ending would be another matter. Even if he missed the dark-skinned girl, he wouldn't be able to let Brainpecker kill her. If there was no accuracy, even if he learned 7 or 8 continuous arrows, it would be meaningless if he missed. Dean took out his dagger and drew a spiral mark on the shaft. Although it was crooked and couldn't be compared to the craftsman's, but he was idle, so he practiced to familiarize himself with the feeling. After I go back, I have to improve the range. I didn't learn continuous arrow step by step. Otherwise I wouldn't have time to improve the accuracy and range. If my range was 300 meters or even 500 meters, then I wouldn't need to spend so much effort to kill Linda. Especially when I attracted those brainpecker beasts. I almost lost my life. Dean lifted the black bow and pulled it to perfection. The arrow spun and flew out rapidly, but when it reached about 100 meters, it hit the grass in a diagonal line. If there is a target there, then the deviation is too big. Although Dean expected that spiral arrow would be difficult, but he didn't think that there would be such a big deviation. Was it because he carved the spiral too deep, which caused the airflow to be too big? He looked down and thought that it was too big, so he could practice slowly. Time passed little by little in the process of constantly shooting and picking up arrows. In the blink of an eye, 6 days had passed. The passage, which had been closed for a long time, was slowly opened when Dean ran out to pick up the arrows. Dean was pleasantly surprised. His food had long been bottomed out. He had been starving for the past few days. If the passage didn't open, Then he would have to find grass roots to fill his stomach. Peter was the one who opened the passage. He was stunned when he saw Dean. Dean! Hey! Why are you here? A few familiar voices sounded from behind Peter. It was Mason, Zack, and Sham. Dean knew that Peter had sent them out to scavenge. Counting his own training days, it was indeed time for them to come out to perform a task. I came out to perform a task, but got separated from the team. That's why I waited here. Dean laughed. Fortunately, I waited for you, or else I would have starved to death here. Come on, you won't die so easily. Mason came over and laughed. Sham looked up and down at Dean. He couldn't help but ask, "Did you hunt those monsters? Are you hurt?" Dean nodded. "I'm fine." Peter couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you training? Why did they send you out to perform a task?" Dean looked at him. "It's an urgent task. The consortium is short of manpower, so they transferred me here." "But you are a newcomer, how can the consortium?" Peter's face was complex. He knew how dangerous hunting was. Even a junior hunter could die, let alone a young newcomer. However, he also understood the reason in his heart. He could only secretly sigh. "I don't have a light physique. Sure enough, the consortium doesn't pay attention to me." Sigh. Dean roughly guessed Peter's thoughts from his expression. He understood Peter's intentions. He was touched. No matter what, the task has been completed. There should be a lot of rewards. I'll treat Mr. Peter. Well, the three of you too. Be careful when scavenging. I'll be waiting for you to come back for dinner. Then we'll go to the most luxurious place. Mason smiled. Zack's eyes lit up. I'm going to the hotel where the nobles eat. Can't you save money for Dean? Sham was angry and said to Dean, "Let's go to Ivy Tavern to eat." Damn. Mason and Zack were shocked. Is that saving money? Dean was surprised. But from their reaction, he knew that most of them were going to the top taverns in the commercial district. He didn't expect that after a few months, they would know more about the commercial district than him. Alright, pay attention to your safety while scavenging. Dean readily agreed. Peter laughed. This time they are going to the 13th district, which has been scavenged many times. There is basically no danger. They won't encounter undeads like last time. At most, they will encounter a few rats. As long as they are careful and don't act alone, there is basically no danger. Well, there are no resources, Mason whispered. Peter shook his head and smiled. There were other scavengers who joined the Melon Consortium at the same time. They looked at Dean's exquisite armor and black bow. Their faces were complex. They didn't expect that in such a short period of time he would become a big shot. But they were still in the same place. They were excited for the little resources they could get from scavenging. Dean said goodbye to Mason and others and followed Peter into the passage. Wait here for a while. I'll send a message to the Guardian office. They will send someone to pick you up. Peter laughed. Dean nodded. Hunters were the same as scavengers. Every time they return to the giant wall, they need to undergo strict testing. Chapter 127. After leaving the passage, Dean saw Peter use a flute-shaped whistle pipe to summon a black crow. He wrote a message on a pen and paper so that it could send a message. In the vicinity of the giant wall, there are crows raised by consortia. If you have an emergency, you can use them. Peter explained as he saw Dean's curious face. Dean asked, "Are they not afraid of radiation?" This is lead claw crow. Not only are they smart, but they can resist radiation. If you keep them in the living area, they will not be used to it. They like to hunt in the radiation area. Peter laughed. Dean realized that this should be a species unique to the radiation area. Peter didn't leave alone, but stayed with Dean. He saw the huge baggage on Dean's back and laughed. You are a hunter, but you still don't forget to scavenge. With your current treatment, the materials you get from scavenging are not as good as what you get from killing an undead. Dean knew that Peter was worried that he would waste time on unnecessary things. Thinking of his previous concern, he truthfully said, "There are monster materials in here." Peter stared blankly for a moment, somewhat unable to respond. "Monster material? What is in here?" "This. Did you hunt it yourself?" "Almost," Dean answered vaguely, leaving a trace of leeway. Peter stared blankly for a moment. When he recovered, he realized that his behavior was somewhat rude, so he sighed and said, "It seems like I was overthinking it. I didn't expect that you would be able to hunt monsters alone in such a short period of time in the hunting headquarters. Well, you already have the strength of a hunter. What you lack is skills and experience. Look at your weight, it's worth at least dozens of gold coins, right?" The concept of dozens of gold coins was almost the same as hundreds of thousands of gold coins in the old era. Even if Peter had some savings, he was somewhat envious. Dean was surprised. He suddenly understood that Peter thought that he was hunting small monsters like the bonebiter rat. These monsters had very few valuable materials. Such a large amount could indeed be worth dozens of gold coins. However, there were more than 700 cold crystals inside, which was equivalent to 700 gold coins. As for the materials of the monsters that Linda and the others killed, he didn't pick them up to avoid being exposed. After all, Glenn would give him 4,000 gold coins after returning to the giant wall. Now he could be regarded as a rich man. He was richer than most of the primary hunters. After a moment, a carriage made of steel came over. It was as gloomy and cold as a cage. There were 2 knights of light in front of the carriage. However, from the white flame badge on their chest, it could be seen that they were only high-grade apprentice knights. "Go." Peter smiled at Dudian. Dean nodded and got into the carriage. 2 hours later, the carriage gradually stopped. Dean lifted the curtain to look. He found that it was not the castle, but a desolate and empty town. The streets were covered with fallen leaves. The shops on both sides were almost closed. The buildings looked old. "Where is this place?" Dean asked the apprentice knight of light who was responsible for escorting the carriage. The apprentice knight indifferently glanced at him and said, "Clean house." Dean didn't expect the apprentice knight's attitude to be so cold. There was even a trace of disgust. He couldn't help but frown, but didn't care about anything. He put down the curtain. It seemed that the clean house was not the same place as the castle he went to last time. After a moment, the carriage stopped. One of the apprentice knight of light came forward and handed a pair of steel handcuffs to Dean. He indifferently said, "For the sake of insurance, please cooperate with us." Dean was angry in his heart. He thought that he wasn't a prisoner. However, when he saw the white flame badge on the apprentice knight's chest, he held back his anger. Otherwise, they would mistakenly think that he was infected. It would lead to trouble instead. He immediately handed over his hands and let the apprentice knight handcuff them. After handcuffing Dean, the apprentice knight took the key from the hand of the apprentice knight. He helped Dean open the carriage's lock and said, "Please go in front." Dean calmed down. "Did I hand over my burden to you?" "Naturally," the apprentice knight indifferently said. Dean didn't say anything more. He turned and walked in the front. He was escorted by several people like a prisoner into a black hall in front of him. A female knight of light came out of the hall to greet them. She covered her nose and looked at Dean. She waved. "Send him to wash." "Yes," the apprentice knight replied. Dean was taken to a huge bathhouse at the back of the hall. The bathhouse was divided into individual rooms. What made him angry again was that he had to bathe under the surveillance of the other party. Moreover, he had to wear handcuffs during the bathing process. Although he felt humiliated, Dean still endured. After a few baths, he followed the 2 people out of the bathhouse. Outside, a servant dressed as a waiter handed a new set of linen clothes to Dean. Dean followed them to another part of the hall. There was a row of cages. However, they were different from the simple cages he had seen before. The cages here were made of steel that was as thick as a baby's arm. Even a senior hunter wouldn't be able to break them easily. Go in. Someone will come and test you later. The previous apprentice knight indifferently said. Dean didn't say anything and silently entered the cage. The other cages around him were all empty. There was no one in sight. He sat alone in one of them. The Book of Light was still on the table. He didn't look at it but leaned against the wall. He was thinking about the next archery training and alchemy plan. In the blink of an eye, a few days passed. During this period, people came to check Dean's body. However, the method of inspection was different from the last time. They not only checked the radiation content in his body, but also his blood and magic mark. The method of blood test was very simple. It was similar to the blood test in the old era. Drop the normal blood of Dean and other people into a bowl of water to see if Dean's blood would swallow the blood of ordinary people. If it would, it meant that Dean's body was infected with the virus. Someone would immediately be sent to destroy Dean. Although the magic mark's ability was strange, Linda's magic mark could control blood. However, once the blood left her body, it would no longer be under her control. Therefore, this blood test method was by far the most scientific and accurate method. During the inspection, Dean also learned that he needed to stay here for 7 days. The virus incubation time in the body of a hunter and a scavenger was different. The limit was 7 days for a primary hunter, half a month for an intermediate hunter, and a senior hunter needed to stay here for a whole month. This was also the reason why senior hunters didn't perform many tasks, only once or twice a year. Chapter 128. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean's indicators were normal, but the radiation content in his body had increased a lot. It had reached about 1.5 points, which was higher than the average primary hunter. Dean knew that it was mainly because he was immersed in the pool, but he wasn't worried. As long as the radiation value didn't exceed 5 points, it wouldn't affect the body's functions. Once the radiation value exceeded 5 points, he could buy purified water from the Holy Church to eliminate the radiation. Although purified water was expensive, but it wasn't difficult for him to solve the problem with money. On the 8th day, the female Knight of Light that Dean first saw came to the cage and raised her hand to signal. An apprentice Knight of Light behind her took out the key and opened the iron lock of the cage. He said to Dean, "You can leave now. Your consortium's people are waiting for you outside." Dean stood up, patted the dust off his body and followed them. Dean immediately saw a carriage with the flag of the Melon Consortium parked in the distance. In the past few days they had checked his body. They had asked about his identity and helped him to report to the consortium. Dean came to the front of the carriage. The coachman was a middle-aged man. He immediately jumped out of the carriage and respectfully said, "Are you Mr. Dean?" Dean nodded. "I'm here to pick you up. Please get in the carriage." The coachman respectfully said. Dean stepped into the carriage. The interior of the carriage was luxurious and spacious. It was extremely comfortable. It was completely different from the environment where Shojing lived. The carriage went out of the desolate and dilapidated town. After a moment, it entered the outer edge of the commercial district. There were more and more towns and villages around. The road was getting cleaner and smoother. A few hours later, Dean returned to the hunter's headquarters. After getting off the carriage, Dean thanked the coachman and returned to the castle where he had previously trained. He was stopped by 2 guards when he arrived at the entrance. Dean took out his hunter medal and showed it to them. After getting confirmation, he entered the castle manor. Dean went directly to the previous hunter training ground by the river. He saw 5 figures standing in front of their respective training positions. They were still practicing archery. Dean glanced at them and found that they were practicing rapid arrows. 2 of them had practiced to the point of 3 in a row. 5 of them noticed him as he approached. They were surprised. One of them was surprised. "Are you okay?" Dean smiled. Do you want something to happen to me? The young man immediately realized that he was being rude. He quickly waved his hand and said, No, I mean you actually came back. After being gone for so long we all thought you. Dean smiled but didn't say anything. He returned to his training position and found that the two servants who were responsible for assisting him were not there. He could only pick up the bow and arrows, aim at his target and re-enter the training. What task are you going to do this time? The teenager next to Dean looked at him and asked curiously. Dean remembered him. He had chatted with him during the meal. I helped track the monster. The hunt is over. Is it done? The youth asked. Is it very dangerous? Is that monster powerful? Dean saw that the others were also looking at him. There was a bit of curiosity in their eyes. He sighed in his heart. It is very dangerous and very brutal. So if we don't train well, then we can only become their dinner and feces if we encounter monsters. So dirty. One of the girls quickly covered her mouth when she heard the word feces. Dean shrugged and didn't say anything. He continued to pull out the arrows. The others saw that Dean didn't say much. They were disappointed and withdrew their eyes. They didn't take his words too seriously. They had heard too many similar words. They also knew that the monster was very dangerous. It was more terrible than the beasts in the radiation zone. But they were confident that once they got the magic marks, they would also have that kind of inhuman power. At that time, they would also earn a lot of gold coins. The training continued. Half an hour later, the previous young instructor ran over. He saw Dean from afar. His face was obviously relieved. He quickly ran over and said to Dean, Why did you come back so late? I came back a long time ago. I was in the security office. Dean stopped shooting and explained. The young instructor said, I know. If I didn't get the news from the security office 7 days ago, the consortium would have mobilized the investigation team to search for you. Glenn and the others who performed the task with you would have already come back. Glenn? The 5 people were surprised when they heard the name. Glenn was one of the 2 senior hunters in the Melon Consortium. Even the trainee hunters had long heard of her name. Glenn was one of the 2 senior hunters in the Melon Consortium. Glenn's name reverberated in their ears. Even the trainee hunters had long heard of her name. They were familiar with her basic information. They didn't expect that Dean would be following such a big figure in this task. The 5 people couldn't help but envy him. Dean saw the young instructor's stern expression. He lightly coughed and said, I went back to the cleaned area to hunt undead. I was too absorbed in killing and forgot. Well, I knew it. The young instructor coldly snorted. The number of cold crystals you brought back has been counted. A total of 723 pieces. According to the exchange rate of 1-to-1, the finance department has prepared the gold coins for you. If you want to take them, it is best to inform them in advance. Dean saw that the instructor wasn't really angry, so he was relieved and smiled. Yes. The young instructor said, Train well, but don't do such things in the future. This time you are a newcomer, so I won't remember your mistake. The consortium is training you not to specialize in hunting undead. Dean nodded to show that he understood. The young instructor saw that his attitude was good, so his face eased. He didn't continue to say anything. In fact, he was very satisfied with Dean. When he knew that there were more than 700 cold crystals, he was a bit scared. Although undead was a level 4 monster, but it was still very difficult for a beginner hunter to deal with them. Only some beginner hunters who had hunted undead and were familiar with their weaknesses could easily kill them. But for a newcomer it was very difficult to deal with. Just the psychological pressure alone was a hurdle that was very difficult to overcome. As a beginner hunter, Dean was able to hunt so many undead in 7 days. It was enough to show that his hunting talent was extremely good. Whether it was courage or shooting skills, he had passed the test. Compared with other beginner hunters, He only lacked experience and further improvement in skills. Chapter 129. You have just come back from outside the giant wall. I will allow you to rest for a day and come back to training tomorrow, the young instructor said. Hearing this, the other 5 people could not help but look at Dean with envy. They had been selected from all over the world and had never had a rest since they came to the training camp. Even if they were injured, as long as it was not a serious injury, they still needed to train with injuries. A holiday was an extravagant hope for them. No need. Dean shook his head and said, I have rested for 7 days. If I continue to rest, I will forget what it feels like to hold a bow. The young instructor was slightly surprised, but thought that was true, so he said, All right, I won't assign you any tasks today. You practice by yourself, and I'll teach you new archery skills tomorrow. What archery? Dean was curious. Scatter. The young instructor said, This time you have to learn it well. Scatter is also a very important archery skill. If you encounter a group of monsters, you can eliminate them as soon as possible and create the maximum damage. In this way, you can avoid the casualties of the soldiers and knights who are fighting the monsters in front of you. You can't neglect it like you did with the continuous arrows. As soon as Dean heard the name of the archery skill, he lost interest. The young instructor was right. But if the lethality of the arrows was too weak, then it was useless to scatter 7 or 8 arrows. Although the total damage was much higher than a single arrow, it was several times higher. But if you can't kill the monster, then there was not much meaning in shooting it. Moreover, he was pursuing individual combat ability, not team cooperation. After all, if he relied on gunpowder, his ability to hunt monsters alone was not inferior to that of a team. Moreover, the materials obtained from hunting monsters in a team had to be divided equally, so it was naturally not worth it. After all, he was different from other hunters. He did not have a light physique. Every time he went out to hunt, the nuclear radiation value in his body would increase. He had to calculate the price of purified water into the harvest. I will. Dean promised. He thought that if it was not too difficult, then he would learn it. If it was too difficult, then he would not waste his energy. After all, he only had a year of training. He had to learn the techniques that were most suitable for him and the most practical in this 1 year. After the young instructor left, Dudian was about to continue training. But the 5 people next to him suddenly came close to him. One of them curiously asked, You followed Miss Glen to hunt. Have you seen her fight? Is she very powerful? Isn't Lady Glen very beautiful? I heard that when she hunts monsters, she's as beautiful as a phantom. That's why she's called the ghostly assassin. No, she's called the ghost assassin because she got her magic mark from the ghost eye. Dean was speechless as he saw them chattering and asking questions. He could only say, When you graduate, you should be able to see her. You will know when you see her. Even if we graduate, we will only be junior hunters. How can we have such an opportunity to go hunting with her? Yeah, tell me about it. They looked at Dudian with anticipation. Dean had a headache. Apparently, they hadn't figured out the situation. The consortium had simply instilled them with knowledge. They hadn't yet trained them to personally experience the cruelty of hunting. After a few words, Dean sent them away and continued his training. The next day, the young instructor came to teach Dean scattering archery. There were 2 basic points in scattering archery. The first point was to grasp the arrow. When you reach for the quiver on your back, you must first grasp the arrow between your fingers. This point alone required repeated practice. After all, the purpose of scattering archery was to shoot multiple monsters at the same time. It would take too much time to grasp the arrow. It was not as fast as shooting a single arrow. The second point was finger adjustment. According to the distribution of monsters, when the fingers clamped the arrow and put it on the bowstring, it was necessary to quickly adjust the angle of the arrow. The spacing of each arrow was not uniform, so it needed to be adjusted quickly through the fingers. Otherwise, even if the arrows were shot, few would hit the target. Not only would it be a waste of arrows, but it would also affect the efficiency and power. In general, the scattering archery was not difficult. But to really play the role of scattering archery, it must meet the 3 fast criteria. Fast to grasp the arrow, fast to aim, fast to adjust. According to the young instructor, if the speed and accuracy of the scattering archery could be comparable to the single arrow, then it would be considered as complete mastery. Practice well. The movement caused by fighting outside the giant wall is easy to attract other monsters. This is a skill that hunters must master. The young instructor seriously said, "It doesn't matter if you can't learn the rapid shooting, but you must master this." Dudian nodded. Although the scattered archery didn't mean much to him, but the effect on the speed and accuracy of the archery was very obvious. After the young instructor left, he began to practice. The training ground to practice the scattering archery was separated from the other 5 people. It was a separate small field with 4 target positions. The number of arrows that could be caught by one hand was up to 4. However, Dean heard from the young instructor that some senior hunters scattering archery had reached the acme of perfection. They could catch 8 arrows at the same time and shoot monsters in 8 different places at the same time. This meant that each finger needed to clamp 2 arrows. Moreover, they needed to adjust the 2 arrows at different angles to aim. It sounded incredible, but Dean knew that the young instructor would not lie. Dean soon realized the difficulty of catching the arrows. Sometimes his fingers would slip or he would not catch the arrows. After a few hours of boring repetitive practice, he gradually became proficient, but the speed of catching the arrows was still very slow. He calculated that the time he needed to catch the scattered arrows was enough for him to shoot 7 or 8 arrows. Moreover, the accuracy of the single shot was higher. However, Dean knew that in the beginning of learning, he would encounter such problems, so he immediately continued to train patiently. At the end of the day's training, Dean went to the finance department to receive his gold coins. 700 gold coins was a heavy sack. He carried it into the consortium's carriage and headed towards the house assigned to him by the consortium in the dark of the night. He intended to decorate the house as soon as possible so that he could pick up Jura and the others. By the way, he could also let Mason stay in his house. Rumble! Thunder sounded in the sky. Dark clouds covered the sky. After a moment, heavy rain poured down. Dean sat in the carriage and pulled the curtain to prevent the rain from splashing in. He secretly sighed in his heart. The rainy season was troublesome. The rainfall was too frequent. But then he thought that the other 2 seasons were not much better. He could not help but sigh again. Suddenly, the carriage stopped halfway. The horse neighed. Chapter 130. Dean slightly frowned and lifted a small piece of the front curtain to look. They saw a middle-aged gentleman in a straw raincoat standing in front of their carriage in the dark rain. He held a cane in his hand and stretched out his hand to block the carriage. Seeing that the carriage had stopped in time, he seemed to be relieved. He immediately stepped forward and said to the coachman, "Our carriage has broken down. We need to temporarily borrow your carriage." The coachman looked behind him. The heavy rain had affected his line of sight, but he could still see an aristocratic carriage parked on the street. There was an oil lamp inside the carriage. It was like a warm spark in the heavy rain. He hesitated to look at Dudian. "Sir, this is—" Dean didn't wait for him to finish. He waved his hand. "No." The middle-aged gentleman was stunned as he heard the tender voice inside the carriage. He immediately stepped forward and said, "Hello, I'm the butler of the Bourong family. I hope to borrow your carriage. You can rest assured that I will pay you double the price. Of course, I won't let you get wet in the rain. You can go to my lady's carriage to take shelter. It's still early. I believe there will be other carriages coming over." Dean slightly frowned. The Burong family was one of the top members of the Melon Consortium. He didn't expect to encounter such trouble. He could only say, "I'm sorry, I'm in a hurry. You continue to wait for other carriages." The middle-aged gentleman's face turned ugly. He was about to continue to say something when a voice came from the aristocratic carriage. "Uncle, forget it. Give me the raincoat and I'll ride back." "Miss, how can you do that?" The middle-aged gentleman turned and hurriedly said, "The rain is so heavy. You will catch a cold riding a horse." "It's okay. My body is very strong," the woman in the carriage said. The middle-aged gentleman hurried to persuade her. Dean listened to the voice in the carriage. It was familiar, although the rainstorm was interfering, but his hearing was not comparable to ordinary people. He faintly heard the voice. Suddenly, a figure flashed in his mind. He hurriedly said, "Come over." The middle-aged gentleman was stunned as he heard Dean call him. He turned around. "Do you agree?" "Yes." Dean nodded. "But I have a request. I won't leave the carriage. If your lady wants to come up, I can send her back." "This." The middle-aged gentleman hesitated and shook his head. "No, our miss can't be in the same carriage with strangers." Dean couldn't help but frown. "It's fine, Uncle Da," the female voice in the carriage said. "Shiming will follow me on horseback. If there is any danger, he will protect me." When the middle-aged gentleman heard this, he glanced at the armored knight sitting on a tall horse beside the carriage. He hesitated for a moment and said, "All right, but I will personally escort you back." "No, I can't fit in the car." Dudian immediately refused. The middle-aged gentleman choked and said angrily, "What do you mean? What are you trying to do with our miss? I tell you, our Burong family is not something you can afford to provoke." Dudian frowned. "I'm telling the truth. Can't you see it?" The middle-aged gentleman immediately choked. Indeed, this carriage was a small single-person carriage that could only seat 2 people. "Well, Shiming, you must protect the Mississippi. There can't be any accident." The middle-aged gentleman hesitated again and again, but still agreed. He solemnly told the knight. The reason why he agreed was mainly because, judging from Dean's voice, he felt that Dean wasn't too old. He guessed that Dean was the child of a rich family, so he didn't worry too much. If the other party was an adult, he would definitely not agree. Dean saw the other side agree, and his face showed a trace of a smile. He saw the middle-aged gentleman return to the carriage with the broken wheel. He opened the carriage with a black umbrella, and a petite figure bent down from inside. She lifted her skirt and followed him to the front of Dean's carriage. Dean opened the door and saw her appearance at a glance. His heart was filled with joy. He reached out to help her in. "No need." The middle-aged gentleman was relieved when he saw that Dean was alone in the carriage. But when he saw that Dean was careless, he immediately frowned and pushed his hand away. He helped the girl into the carriage and said to Dean with a serious face, "Never touch my miss, do you understand? Miss, if he dares to touch you, you let Shiming beat him." The girl kept her head down. After sitting in the carriage, she quickly looked up and glanced at Dean. When she saw Dean's appearance, she was stunned for a moment. Her cheeks flashed a touch of crimson. She heard the middle-aged gentleman's words and subconsciously replied, "Okay, Uncle, be careful on the road." "Miss, you don't have to worry about me," the middle-aged gentleman said, and then stared at Dean with a hint of warning. He closed the door to prevent the rain from splashing in. Dean turned a blind eye to it and directly ignored it. "Coachman, go to Glinton Street 1," the middle-aged butler said to the coachman. The coachman saw that Dean didn't say anything, so he immediately agreed. He whipped the horse and started to run. In the small carriage, Dean looked at the figure next to him and smiled. "I haven't seen you for a long time. I didn't expect you to turn out to be the Burong family's Mississippi. Last time you dared to deceive me." "I didn't mean to." The girl looked up at him. She seemed to feel that her breath would blow on his face. She couldn't help but blush and quickly lowered her head. She was Jenny who Dean had sneaked out of the aristocratic banquet and met last time. Well, you didn't mean to. Fortunately, you met me today, otherwise you would be a drowned chicken. Dean laughed. Drowned chicken? Jenny seemed to have heard this term for the first time. She was stunned for a moment, and then she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Where did you learn such strange words from? I won't be in such a sorry state. I can stay in the carriage and not come out. Really? Didn't someone say that he was going to ride a horse? Dean burst into laughter. I didn't expect you to ride a horse. Noble ladies shouldn't practice riding, right? Yes, riding a horse is too unladylike, Jenny calmly said, but I think riding a horse is very cool. Moreover, it's not that there aren't female knights, but the number is relatively small. Dean nodded in agreement. As long as there is a will to do one thing, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Do you think so? Jenny turned her head and stared at him happily. Dean glanced at her and found that her eyes were shining like two bright gems. His heartbeat inexplicably accelerated a bit. He took back his eyes and said in a serious tone, Yes, riding a horse is not a man's patent. Jenny's face showed a smile. But my father doesn't like to see me riding a horse. Every time he sees me, he gets angry and loses his temper. Then ride it secretly, Dudian said. That's what I did, Jenny slyly said. Dean couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 131. By the way, why are you here so late at night? Dudian asked curiously. Chapter 81 News Network. Jenny was excited as she heard him ask about this. Do you remember what I told you last time? I'm studying law. In a few days the magistrate will be recruiting trainees. I've been taking the time to study. I just came out from the house of an old magistrate who has a good relationship with my family. I didn't expect that it would rain halfway and the car would break down. Fortunately, I met you. So, we are quite predestined. Dudian laughed. Predestined? Jenny was puzzled. Dudian thought that the meaning of the word, predestined, came from the concept of Buddhism. There was no Buddhism in this world. He quickly explained. The meaning of predestined? Well, it's like two people are arranged by the god of light. They meet by chance. It's called predestined. Two people arranged by the god of light? Jenny's face turned red as she heard Dudian's explanation. She secretly looked at Dudian to see that he didn't notice her abnormality. She curiously asked, What about you? Why are you here? Dudian said, I'm going home. Jenny suddenly thought of something. There was a bit of excitement and expectation on her face. Have you been outside the giant wall? How is it? Is it good outside? Is it really like what my father said? Isn't it dangerous? Dudian looked at her eyes flashing. He suddenly remembered the night when the girl was full of longing words. He secretly sighed in his heart. But there was a smile on his face. It's like what you think. There are vast grasslands, towering mountains and blue sea. Really? Jenny was pleasantly surprised. Dudian nodded. Well, although it's a bit dangerous, but if you can see the beautiful scenery and the vast world, then what's the point of experiencing a little danger? I think so too. Jenny's mood was touched. I hope that one day I can see the scenery outside the giant wall. Yes, Dudian firmly said. Jenny sighed. Her face turned gloomy. Unfortunately, I can't go out. Dudian slowly said, Even if you don't go out, you can see it. Really? Jenny looked at him in surprise, a little expectant. Dean said, If the giant wall disappears, then naturally we will be able to see it. Jenny shook her head. The giant wall protects us. If the giant wall disappears, we will be in danger. Dean's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. Tell me about the outside world, Jenny said to Dudian. Dean saw her staring at him. His face felt a little hot. He coughed and said, Yes, yes. Why are you stuttering? Ahem, it must be cold. Are scavengers afraid of the cold? Anyone would be afraid. Well, I won't interrupt you. You can continue. Jenny looked at Dean with one hand on her cheek, looking forward to it. Dean felt his whole body was stiff. His muscles tightened uncontrollably. He coughed and said, "Well, I'll tell you about what I've seen. First of all, the mountains are very high. The trees are lush and there are many cute animals. There are rabbits, foxes, squirrels. No monsters?" Jenny changed the topic. Dudian nodded. "The monsters are somewhere else." "Where?" "Well, a very chaotic place. In short, it is far away from the mountain I've seen." "Well, go on, I want to listen." "There is a waterfall on the mountain. There are peaceful and friendly primitive people." The carriage moved slowly in the rainy night. The young knight was riding next to the carriage. His armor had been washed many times by the rain. The clothes under the armor were slightly soaked. He listened to the laughter coming from the carriage from time to time. His eyebrows slightly wrinkled, but he didn't say anything. He followed in silence. There are many fish and shrimps in the sea. There are mussels that can grow pearls in their bodies. Well, pearls are snow-white beads. They are as beautiful as diamonds. They are very round and very smooth. Dudian talked about the mountains and the sea. His childish voice was particularly quiet in the company of the howling rainstorm outside the carriage. Jenny listened carefully. There was a bit of surprise and yearning on her face when she heard about pearls. "I really want to see the pearls you are talking about." Dudian smiled but didn't say anything. Due to the biological changes caused by the virus and nuclear radiation, there were no pearls inside the giant wall. The pearls left outside the giant wall from the old era had long passed their shelf life and were rotten. Therefore, the people inside the giant wall didn't know about the existence of pearls. At this time, the carriage gradually slowed down, and with two neighs from Flattery, the carriage came to a complete stop. "Miss, we are here," the coachman said cleverly. Jenny recovered. She didn't expect to be home in the blink of an eye. She looked at Dudian. Her face flashed a trace of crimson. "Thank you for sending me back." "It's on the way," Dudian said. Jenny's cheeks became redder. At this time, the knight outside the carriage had jumped off the horse. He maintained his knight's demeanor and gently knocked on the door. "Miss, we are home." Jenny heard the urging and opened the door. She saw that the knight was waiting outside with an umbrella. She immediately lifted her skirt and got off the carriage. Once again, she said to Dudian, "Thank you for telling me the story." "Story?" Dudian saw that he was seen through. He blushed. "It's good that you like it." "I like it very much." Jenny's face was red. She hesitated for a moment. She plucked up her courage and said, "Thank you for the poem you wrote to me last time. I have been treasuring it." She didn't dare to look at Dudian again. She turned and ran away. The knight hurriedly held up an umbrella and chased after her to cover her. Dudian was stunned. Last time's poem? Suddenly he thought of the poem read by his sister. It seemed that poetry and drama were really the favorite of the aristocracy. He didn't think much about it. After Jenny entered the manor, he told the coachman, "Let's go." At the moment the rain had stopped. The water flowed into the sewer along the street. The drainage system of the commercial district was often repaired. It was completely different from the scene in the slums. The rain stopped. The carriage turned around and started moving at full speed. Dudian sat in the carriage. The air was still floating with the faint body fragrance of the other person. He could smell that the other person didn't wear perfume. It was a natural body fragrance. He couldn't help but recall the previous picture. His face couldn't help but show a smile. There was a warm feeling in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of Jenny's words. "In a few days the magistrate will be recruiting trainees? I don't know if I can pass the assessment with my knowledge of the law." Chapter 132. Thinking of this, Dean fell into deep thought. After a while, The carriage came to a remote town on the edge of the commercial district and stopped in front of an ordinary resident's house. Dean opened the curtain. The rain had stopped outside, but there was still water on the ground. He looked at the door number of the ordinary building. After confirming that it was correct, he sighed slightly. He picked up the bag of gold coins under the chair and got off the carriage. He asked the coachman to wait for a moment. Then he took out the key and entered the small building. The furniture in the small building was new and complete. Most of it was arranged by the consortium when they assigned it to him. But during his training, the room had accumulated a thick layer of dust. "I need to recruit a few servants." Dean touched the dust and threw the bag of gold coins into the safe in the small building. This was a new safe, so he set a new password. Dong! The old swinging clock on the wall rang. Dean looked at the time. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. The curfew would start in an hour. He immediately locked the door and left the small building. He took the carriage back to the Hunter headquarters. The next day, Dean got up on time. When he arrived at the cafeteria to eat breakfast, he felt that some of the other early students were secretly glancing at him and whispering. However, these deliberately suppressed voices were still very clear in his ears. "I didn't expect that I would become a little celebrity because of Glenn." Dean's mouth twitched. He quickly ate his breakfast and went to the scattering training ground to continue yesterday's training. The two servants who were responsible for assisting him in archery were waiting for him to prepare the arrows. With the help of both of them, Dean was able to concentrate on the training and his efficiency was at least doubled. The young instructor came earlier today. He watched Dean practice and from time to time gave pointers. He was very satisfied with Dean's quick comprehension. Seeing that Dean had mastered the basic essentials of scattering, he assigned him tasks for today and left. Since absorbing hundreds of cold crystals, Dean's physical strength had already exceeded the young instructor's estimation. The tasks assigned by the instructor were easily completed by around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Dean didn't continue to practice as he thought about the magistrate's recruitment in a few days. He left the training ground and went to a nearby branch of the magistrate. Although it was a branch, the building style was extraordinary. It was as magnificent as the scavenger headquarters. The steps at the entrance were 18 floors high. Dadian immediately went forward to consult. "That's right, the apprentice priest recruitment will be held in 5 days at the Boar Square. If you want to join, you'll have to pass the preliminary test first," the guard said. Dadian thanked him and left. He took the carriage to the residential area. It was already dusk. Jura and her husband were having dinner at home. Both of them were surprised to see Dadian come back. Dadian looked at them. "The house in the commercial district is ready. I came back to take you there. If you don't want to live in the commercial district for the time being, you can go with me to the commercial district to apply for a temporary residence permit. Then you can go there at any time." Jura's face was filled with gratification and gratitude as she smiled and agreed. Gray smiled and said, "Your auntie has always been reluctant to leave this place. She has lived here for too long and is familiar with the surrounding neighbors, so she doesn't want to leave." Dadian nodded. He knew Jura's temperament. After all, she was sentimental. The next day, Dadian called the carriage and took Jura and her husband to the commercial district. He helped them with the temporary residence permit and took them to see the new house. Jura and her husband were very satisfied. Although the house was in the suburbs of the commercial district, but it was far better than the house they lived in the residential area. Dean took out 100 gold coins from the safe and gave it to them along with the house key so that they could take care of it themselves. At around 9 o'clock, Dean arrived at the training ground. The young instructor saw that he was late, severely criticized him, and then asked for the reason. Dadian answered truthfully. The young instructor's face eased a bit after listening to Dadian. Then he increased the task by 1/3 as a punishment. Dadian recalled the law knowledge in his mind while training. The position of a priest was a protective charm for him. With this position, he was no longer an ordinary civilian. Although he was now a hunter, his identity was still that of a commoner. Being a civilian meant that if he died, apart from the Melon Consortium, it wouldn't cause much waves in the outside world. It also meant that the risk of killing him wasn't high. In the blink of an eye, a day passed. Dudian completed the task assigned by the young instructor at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But he insisted on practicing until around 5 o'clock before going back. 5 days passed quickly. Dudian practiced scatter archery during the day to improve his accuracy. At night, he found some law books from the library and went back to his room to review them. Every day, he stayed up until 12 o'clock in the evening to sleep. He slept for 6 hours. "Instructor, I want to take a day off." Dudian changed into ordinary clothes and went to the training ground to find the young instructor. The young instructor frowned as he saw his outfit. "Where are you going?" "It's a little private matter." "It's very important," Dudian euphemistically replied. The young instructor looked at him, snorted coldly, and said, "Go, but I'll remember today's task for you." Dudian was overjoyed. He quickly thanked the young instructor and quickly turned away. The 5 people next to him were stunned. One of them reacted and said in a hurry, "Instructor, I also want to take a day off." "Get out." Dudian jumped into the carriage and told the coachman to rush to Paul Square at full speed. Half an hour later, the carriage came to the street outside Paul Square and stopped. Dudian heard the noise outside. He opened the curtain and was shocked to see the street was full of people. The carriages were lined up like a long dragon. These people were obviously coming to participate in the exam. So many people. Dudian felt some pressure. He jumped out of the carriage and squeezed through the crowd. Although he was taller than his peers, but compared to the robust adults, he was much smaller. He quickly drilled through the crowd like a loach. On the way, there was a hot-tempered man carrying a girl on his shoulder. It seemed that he wanted to push his child to the front of the crowd. Dudian slid past him and squeezed him. He was so angry that he shouted at a teenager behind him. The youth was stunned by the scolding and was a little dazed. Halfway through the crowd, Dudian suddenly saw a very familiar carriage among the long line of carriages. He suddenly remembered that he had seen it on that rainy night. "It's her." Dudian was pleasantly surprised. At the same time, he smelled the fragrance from the chaotic crowd. He immediately squeezed through the crowd and moved over. A knight in full armor saw Dudian approaching. He immediately raised his hand and said, "Back off." Dudian immediately stopped and shouted, "Jenny!" Chapter 133. Dean didn't expect to meet her halfway. He was very happy. "What a coincidence to meet you again." Jenny happily said, "How come you are here?" "I said that my goal is as great as yours." Dean laughed. "I'm also here to take the exam and strive to be a magistrate." Jenny was slightly surprised, her cheeks reddened. "Have you studied the law?" "Of course I have." Dean deliberately showed a proud look. Jenny covered her mouth and snickered. "Is that so? Then I'll wait and see." "You'll see," Dean said confidently. Jenny looked at the front of the carriage team. There was a sea of people. The carriage could only move forward very slowly. She couldn't help but show a bit of worry. "There are too many people. It's a problem if we can get through. I'm afraid we won't be able to catch up." Dean also felt that this was a problem. He thought for a moment and said to her, "How about you get off the carriage and I'll take you through?" "You?" Jenny looked at him and shook her head. "You won't be able to squeeze through." "No, I'm very strong." Dean raised his arm and deliberately pinched his muscles. "Don't forget what I do." Jenny's eyes lit up. "Well, wait for me. I'll come down immediately." "Miss, don't." The knight in front of Dean saw that she was really going to get off the carriage and hurriedly stopped her. The door was pushed open and Jenny trotted down the carriage. She was wearing a green floral skirt. It was extremely eye-catching and full of lively atmosphere. "Don't stop me or I'll miss the exam. I'll complain to my father." Jenny saw the knight in front of her and hurriedly said. The knight hesitated. "Miss, I'll carry you on my back and escort you. I swear by the loyalty of a knight that I absolutely don't have any bad thoughts." He hadn't finished his words when he was suddenly pushed on his back. The force was so heavy that he almost staggered. When he looked back, he saw that the boy who was previously stopped by him had grabbed the miss and squeezed into the crowd. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. "Miss! Miss!" The young knight turned pale with fright and hurriedly shouted. He pushed the two people in front of him apart and tried to squeeze through. However, with his strong physique and armor, it was inevitable that he would accidentally injure some people if he tried to squeeze through the dense crowd. It was against the rules of a knight. Let. Dean grabbed Jenny's small hand with one hand and pushed away the crowd with the other. They were like two small fish jumping left and right in the crowd. Dean breathed a sigh of relief as the knight didn't chase after him. He came to the edge of the street and looked at Jenny. "Are you okay?" Jenny patted her chest and said, "I'm fine. I just can't breathe. It's too stuffy." "It's okay. Let's take a break," Dean said thoughtfully. Jenny nodded. Suddenly, she found that her hand was still tightly held by Dean. Her face turned hot as she whispered, "You can let go of me." Dean remembered that he was still holding her hand. He immediately felt that her hand was soft and boneless. There was an inexplicable warmth and agitation in his heart. "There are too many people here. If I let go of you, we will be separated." Jenny woke up and thought of the surrounding situation. If she was separated from Dudian, she would be alone in this chaotic crowd. She shuddered. For a time, she felt that his palm was so thick and warm that she was full of security. She couldn't help but blush. She bowed her head and didn't say anything. Dean saw that she didn't speak. He thought that what he said was inappropriate. He added, "But don't worry. Even if we are separated, I will find you no matter where you are." Jenny bowed her head and softly replied. She didn't dare to look up. After a moment, Dean waited for Jenny's breath to become even. Once again, he took her to squeeze through the crowd. The crowd in front of him was gently pushed away by his hand. The people who were pushed away wanted to get angry, but they couldn't see his shadow. Most of them vented their anger on the wrong person, causing a lot of quarrels and curses. It didn't take long for Dean and Jenny to reach the end of the street in front of Boar Square. There was a sea of people here. "Let me see what the situation is," Dean said to Jenny. He jumped up and saw the scene in front of him. Although the periphery of the square was full of people, there was a circle with a diameter of about 20 meters in the center of the square. There was a rectangular table in the center of the open space. 3 figures in white robes were sitting behind it. 2 men and 1 woman. In front of them was a long line. After Dean landed, he continued to bounce up and quickly glanced at the source of the team. "How is it?" Jenny quickly asked as she saw Dean fall down. Dean smiled and said, "Come with me." He grabbed her hand and squeezed through the crowd from the side. After a moment, they came to the back of the previous line. There was a large group of boys and girls standing here. They were dressed in extraordinary clothes. Judging from their temperament and clothes, most of them were children of aristocratic families or rich businessmen. It could be seen how attractive the position of magistrate was. Dean held Jenny's hand and quietly squeezed behind these people. After a moment, the number of people in front of them was reduced one by one. Dean held Jenny's hand and followed the crowd to squeeze into the line. "You stand in front of me," Dean said to Jenny. Jenny stared at him, but didn't say anything. She quietly stood in front of him. Dean stood behind her, smelling the faint fragrance of her hair. His heart was full of good feelings. He felt that the line could go on forever. "The first test seems to be very strict." Jenny looked at the young boys and girls in front of her. They were all depressed and came back one by one. Dean encouraged her. Believe in yourself. You can do it. Hearing his words, Jenny's nervous heart slightly relaxed. Soon, the people in front of her had left and it was Jenny's turn. This is the test question. Please write the answer in 1 minute. A white-haired old man in the center of the table said indifferently. The maid who waited on the 3 people came up and handed Jenny a piece of white paper and a quill pen. She asked her to come to the table to answer. The people in the back don't peek, the maid said to Dean and the people behind him. In fact, even if Dean wanted to peek, he couldn't. Jenny's body was facing away from him when she was filling out the test question. A middle-aged woman sitting on the left looked at the pocket watch in her hand and said, "Time's up." Jenny immediately stopped writing. The old man in the center picked up the white paper and looked at it. He nodded. "Good, you are qualified. Tomorrow morning before 9 o'clock, come to the Puss Avenue Magistrate for the interview. I wish you success." Jenny was stunned for a moment before she was pleasantly surprised. "Please don't talk to other people," the maid next to Jenny told her. Jenny looked back at Dean. She wanted to say something but stopped. Dean laughed. "You wait for me. I'll take you out of here." Chapter 134. Dean stepped forward and came to the front of the long table. "I will give you 1 minute," the white-robed old man indifferently said. Dean took the paper and pen and quickly glanced at the answers. There were 3 questions in total. Question 1. When the nobles violate the law, how will you deal with them? Dean saw the problem and without hesitation quickly wrote a word. Kill. Question 2. When the Knights of Light fall, how will you deal with them? Kill. Dean continued to write. Question 3. When you meet an evil alchemist, how will you deal with them? Dean hesitated a little, but quickly wrote. Kill. It's done. Dean handed over the paper. The 3 people behind the long table were surprised. The middle-aged woman who was holding a pocket watch looked at the pointer on the pocket watch and said, "Only 10 seconds have passed. You can answer slowly." No. Dean shook his head. The 3 looked at each other. The old man in the middle took Dean's answer sheet and looked down. He saw that the answer to each question was 1 word. Kill. The handwriting was like a knife, and the meaning of the words was murderous. The old man's eyes, which had always been half closed, opened a lot. He looked up at the handsome boy in front of the table. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "You are qualified. Go to the magistrate's office on Puss Avenue for an interview tomorrow. My name is Meade." When the 2 people next to him heard his words, they were a little surprised. They tilted their heads and looked at the answer sheet in his hand. When they saw the 3 simple words on it, they couldn't help but be a little startled. No wonder he only took 10 seconds to finish writing. This answer was definitely the most concise one they had ever seen in their many years of service. "Good boy." The middle-aged man on the right looked at Dean and said, "His temperament is good, but his hostility is a bit heavy. It will be better to restrain himself in the future." The old man in the middle called Meade said, "At such a young age, you should have such spirit. This is also the reason why we set an age limit for magistrates." He waved to the maid next to him. The maid understood and led Dean away from the team. Dean was relieved to see that he had passed the test. Although there were many euphemisms for the answer, but this was his heart. Moreover, when he saw the question, he already knew what the goal of this preliminary examination was, and as such, he answered it with the olden era's legal standards. If he couldn't pass, he could only accept it. "That's great." Jenny, who was waiting at the side, exclaimed in surprise. Dean blinked. "I told you that I would definitely pass." "Both of you, come and register your identity," the maid interrupted Dean. Dean and Jenny looked at each other and smiled. They followed the maid to register their identity and household registration information. Nobles, commoners. The maid looked at their household registration information and quickly recorded it. Then she handed 2 cards to Dean and Jenny. "This is your certificate of qualification. Please keep it properly." Dean and Jenny put away their weapons. "You can leave from here," the maid said considerately. Dudian looked in the direction she was pointing. It was also crowded, but there were 2 knights of the magistrate guarding there. The maid brought them over and informed the knights of the magistrate. The 2 young knights of the magistrate immediately dispersed the crowd and made a narrow aisle for Dean and Jenny. Dean took Jenny's hand and went out along the aisle. They came out of the square and left along another street with fewer people. "Your carriage is blocked on that street. I'll hire another carriage to take you back," Dean said to her. Jenny nodded. "I didn't expect so many people to come to apply. No wonder Father told me to seize the opportunity. Fortunately, I met you. Otherwise, I would still be sitting in the carriage waiting for you." Dean smiled. "The magistrate's profession is too hot. It is more glorious than the Knights of Light of the Holy Church. Now that you have passed the preliminary test, you will pass the law exam tomorrow. Then you will become a real probationary magistrate. Then you will be one step closer to your dream." "Yes." Jenny's mood suddenly brightened up. She suddenly thought of something and said to Dean, "How did you answer so quickly? What was your answer?" Dean replied, "How did you answer? The higher-ups asked me what to do if the nobles break the law. I said, of course they are the same as civilians. They have to accept the sanctions of the law. In front of the law, everyone is equal," Jenny said in a serious tone. Dean looked at her beautiful face and sighed. "Well said. Yes, everyone is equal." "Is that how you answered?" Jenny turned her head and asked. "Well, almost, but not as good as you. It's more simple," Dean stammered. Jenny covered her mouth. "It's simple. You are eloquent. I'm sure you can summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences. But I'm too long-winded." "This is called comprehensive," Dean joked. Jenny smiled from ear to ear. "You really know how to talk. It's strange that other people answered wrong for such a simple question. It's very difficult for an honest person to deceive others. It's impossible for a false person to tell the truth," Dean said. Jenny came to a realization and said with a smile, "Your view is indeed different from ordinary people." "You too," Dean said sincerely. Jenny's face was flushed, but she didn't lower her head to hide it. She gently bit her lower lip and stared at Dean's eyes. "Do you really think so?" Dean's heart was pounding as she looked at him. He subconsciously said, Of course." Jenny took a deep look at him and retracted her gaze. She did not say anything. She walked side by side with Dean on the street. The air was subtly warming up for a while. Dean coughed and said, "There is a carriage in front of us. Shall we go and take a ride?" "Yes." Jenny gently nodded. Dean sat with her inside the carriage. He felt the temperature inside the small carriage quickly rose. It was so hot that his face was burning. In order to alleviate the embarrassment, he said, "I'm a little unfamiliar with the law. Can you teach me?" "Okay." Jenny was happy to agree. Dean asked her some questions that he wasn't familiar with. Jenny patiently answered and explained them one by one. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the carriage stopped. Dean suddenly came back to his senses. He knew that he had arrived at her house. Jenny looked at him and whispered, "I will go back first. See you tomorrow." "Well, see you tomorrow. I'll wait for you." Dean watched her go down the driveway. Chapter 135. It was just noon. After lunch, Dean went back to the scattering training ground to continue his practice. 81 Delta Chinese Delta net in the afternoon. The young instructor came to see Dudian. He was surprised but didn't say anything. After watching Dudian's archery practice, he pointed out a few minor flaws in Dudian's posture and left. In the evening, Dudian returned to the dormitory and began to review the law books that he had borrowed from the library. The next day, Dean got up on time. After breakfast, he found the young instructor and asked for leave. "You're asking for leave again?" The young instructor frowned. "Although you are an official hunter, but there is a time limit for the current skill training. You can't neglect it. Yesterday you were allowed to take a day off. It was an exception. What's the matter today?" Dean knew that it would not work if he didn't explain the reason. He said, "Yesterday I went to the magistrate's recruitment and passed the preliminary exam. Today I will go to the official exam." Apprentice priest recruitment? The young instructor was surprised. Every time there was a big event in the magistrate, it was a big event. He had naturally heard about yesterday's news, but he didn't expect that Dudian would ask for leave for this reason. The young instructor looked at Dudian suspiciously. "Have you studied the law? To pass the magistrate's probationary magistrate's examination doesn't just require a little knowledge of the law. You need to be proficient in it. Even many people who have graduated from law school find it difficult to meet the requirement." "I'll try." Dean wasn't too sure. The young instructor thought for a moment and said, "All right, I wish you success." Dean was overjoyed and said, "Thank you, instructor. Go, come back early." The young instructor waved his hand. Dudian turned and left. He went outside the headquarters to find a carriage and went straight to Puss Avenue. Puss Avenue was located in the central block of the bustling West District of the Commercial District. The price of every meter of land here was enough to buy a small building in a small town outside the suburbs of the Commercial District. It was not an exaggeration to say that every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. The people living in the central area of the Western District were either rich or of high status. Elegant and high-end shops were everywhere. Noblewomen could be seen walking in and out of jewelry stores with their children and pets in their arms. The carriage stopped in front of Puss Avenue's magistrate. Unlike the neighboring streets, there weren't many people on the street. It was deserted. In the middle of the street there was a towering building. It was about 30 meters tall, and it looked like a giant black beast. The top half of the building was shaped like a sharp gourd, and on the top of the sharp horn there was a huge cross sign. The cross, in the canon of the Light Church, represented purification. Dudian saw magistrates wearing white robes along the way. They were holding law books in their hand. They were reading attentively while walking. "I'm here to take the exam." Dean walked down the stairs to the solemn and gloomy magistrate. He took out the card and said to the magistrate guard. The young magistrate guard glanced at the card indifferently and nodded. "Please come in." Dean entered the magistrate. The lobby on the first floor was extremely spacious. Rays of light were projected from the dome. Dean looked up and saw that there were white crystal-like objects inlaid in the dome. He was surprised. As he was looking around, a white silk-robed maid came over and gently said, "You're here to take the exam. Please come with me." Under her lead, Dean came to the lobby. There was a cathedral-like hall with rows of seats. There was an independent podium in front of it. At the moment, there were more than a dozen figures sitting in the hall. All of them were boys and girls of his age. Most of them were dressed in gorgeous, bright colors, and the fabric was mainly silk. Only 2 or 3 of them were dressed in linen and woolen materials. In front of the independent podium, there were several tables. At the moment, there was no one behind the tables. There were several white-robed maids waiting respectfully. Dean randomly found a remote seat. After a moment, he suddenly smelled Jenny's scent. His heart was happy. It didn't take long for him to see Jenny wearing a green silk dress. Dean immediately stood up and waved to her. Jenny was choosing a seat when she suddenly noticed Dean. Her eyes lit up. She quickly walked over and sat on the seat next to Dean. "You're early." Jenny lowered her voice after sitting down. Dudian laughed. "The early bird gets the worm." "What about the early worm?" Jenny slyly asked. Dean choked and laughed. "Eaten by the bird." Jenny covered her mouth and giggled. She asked, "Are you ready?" "Yes," Dean confidently said, As long as I know how to take the exam, I'll get full marks. Jenny giggled. While the two were talking and laughing, the other candidates continued to come. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the nearly 5-meter-high door behind the examination room was slowly pushed and closed by 2 attendants. At this time, a small door at the front of the examination room opened, and 4 figures wearing white robes with golden embroidery walked out. There were 2 men and 2 women, and the youngest among them was around 30 years old. Their expressions were cold and solemn, and they didn't like to smile. Silence. One of the old men in his 50s said coldly. The venue was silent. The exam time is 1 hour. The old man waved to the maid next to him. The latter handed an hourglass and put it on the table. The old man pressed his palm on the hourglass and looked around at the crowd. I hope you remember what kind of quality a magistrate should have. If I see anyone trying to cheat, you will be punished according to the law. You will be detained for a month. Dozens of people in the audience looked at each other and didn't dare to make a sound. Dean winked at Jenny. Jenny was nervous, but when she saw Dean's funny expression, she couldn't help but smile. After a moment, the exam began. The hourglass turned upside down and the sand slowly passed. Dean looked at the paper in his hand, holding the quill pen to answer. He had seen many of the questions, so he wrote the answers after thinking a little. However, there were still some questions that gave him a headache. He only felt that he had seen them vaguely, but he couldn't remember them clearly. After all, his knowledge of the law was completely from the scavenger special training. He squeezed out a little time every day to learn. If you are the proposed legal person, where do you think the law needs to be improved? Dean looked at the last question and slightly raised his eyebrows. This question tested the overall understanding of the law. If the content of the answer was the law that had been implemented or the law that had been abolished in the early days, it would naturally expose that his understanding of the law was not comprehensive enough. Dean thought for a moment, but still decided to write. If I am the proposed legal person, the first rule will be to abolish slavery and aristocracy. If you want to achieve equality in front of the law, you must achieve equality in the value of life. There is no distinction between high and low. Time's up. At this time, the old man in front of him shouted. Dean immediately put down the pen. Jenny, who was next to him, also quickly looked at him. Both of them exchanged glances and immediately understood that the other side had finished the paper. After a moment, the papers were collected. Everyone, please go back and wait for the notice in 3 days, the old man said. The door was pulled open, and the others left one after another. Dean said to Jenny, "Shall I send you back?" Jenny's face reddened. "My aunt sent me here today. She is waiting for me outside." Dean smiled. "See you in 3 days." Okay. The two said goodbye to each other at the gate. Dean looked at Jenny, who was taken away by a lady in a white velvet coat. They sat in a spacious and exquisite aristocratic carriage. Dean retracted his eyes and entered his own carriage to leave. After returning to the Hunter headquarters, Dean saw that it was still early, so he went back to the scattering field to continue practicing. The young instructor saw him and asked him about the exam. Finally, he told him not to be distracted and to focus on his duties as a hunter. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Dean said goodbye to the young instructor in advance. After breakfast, he left the Hunter headquarters and drove to the magistrate. There were dozens of other people waiting for the results on the same day. It was still early when Dean arrived. He didn't wait for long before he saw Jenny's carriage coming from the end of the street. After a moment, the door of the carriage opened. Jenny walked out of the carriage with the help of a knight of the Bourong family. She looked up at the crowd for a moment and soon saw Dean's figure. Both of them smiled as they looked at each other. "You are early." Jenny came forward and smiled. Dean winked. "The early hunter gets the bird." Jenny suddenly remembered the words of the last time and couldn't help but laugh. The two of them chatted in low voices. A moment later, the door to the magistrate court opened and a serious-looking old man stepped forward. He read out the names one by one. Anyone whose name was read out represented that they had passed the exam and were now apprentice priests. Jenny Bourong. The old man read out. Jenny was relieved when she heard her name. She patted her chest with a happy face. Dean. The old man read out again. Dean was also relieved. When he handed in the answer sheet, his heart was hanging, because he knew that he was not sure of the answers to several questions. He was purely relying on luck, but he didn't expect that he would still be qualified. Great! Jenny clapped in surprise when she heard Dean's name. Dean saw her happy appearance, and his heart was warm. He smiled. We will work together in the future. Jenny's face reddened. Do you still want to be a scavenger? Dean was surprised. He couldn't help but think of the desolate and cruel scene outside the giant wall. Now that he had obtained the status of a trainee, as long as he wanted, he could completely leave the hunter establishment and live the life of a trainee. Or he could be an ordinary person, just like Peter and other senior members of the scavenger headquarters. Most of them were retired hunters. He hesitated as he thought of this. No one liked to live a precarious life of killing. Even senior hunters were in danger of dying outside the giant wall. Jenny suddenly realized that this was a choice that would determine his future. She hesitated for a moment. If it's too dangerous outside the giant wall as my father said, then I think you should not go. Dean looked up at her. There was a moment of impulse in his heart. He wanted to agree, but in the end he shook his head slightly. I don't want to live inside the giant wall. Jenny stared at him and suddenly smiled. I knew that I didn't read the wrong person. Dean saw that she wasn't angry. He was relieved and smiled. I also didn't read the wrong person. Soon after, the two of them received their status badges as trainees. When they received their badges, they also learned from the old man about their official reporting date and the basic rules for trainees. The basic principles were the same as the purpose of the magistrate. There were three main things: fairness, justice, and openness. I'll go back first. Jenny waved to Dean and got into the carriage. Dean watched her leave. He also returned to his carriage and set off for the hunter's headquarters. The duties of a trainee were the same as that of an ordinary worker. They needed to work 8 hours a day in the magistrate. If their performance was excellent, then they would be promoted to senior trainee. Then they wouldn't need to report to the magistrate every day. They only needed to accompany their superiors and assist them in dealing with the law cases in various areas. 8 hours. In this case, there isn't much time for hunter training. Dean slightly frowned and murmured, however, if I don't want to be promoted to a senior trainee or a senior trainee, then I don't need to report every day. In that case, I will always be a junior trainee and can only do odd jobs in the magistrate. However, I just want the identity of a trainee. In this way, there will be a layer of protection for my life inside the giant wall. Moreover, it will be convenient for future alchemy activities. Thinking of this, Dean immediately decided to focus on the hunter. After all, the hunter's ability to earn gold coins was far from that of a trainee. It was high risk and high reward. After returning to the hunter's headquarters, Dean went to the scattering training ground and continued to practice. Chapter 136. Time passed day by day. Dean's scattering skills were getting more and more proficient. He was able to quickly pull out arrows and shoot at 4 targets at the same time. From the first time he learned scattering to the present, it only took him half a month. The young instructor was very happy to see Dean's amazing progress. Then he continued to teach Dean other hunter skills. They were lurking, tracking, and crossbow. Lurking included how to eliminate the sound of one's movements, cover up the smell, and quickly change positions. In addition to using undead powder to cover up the smell outside the giant wall, he also needed to rely on himself. After all, some monsters liked to hunt undead. If he blindly smeared undead powder, it would be courting death. At this time, he needed to use other things to cover up the smell. These things included plant juice, rotten mud, crushed insect corpses mixed with soil or vines, and so on. Tracking was based on footprints, movement traces of the monster, and so on to determine the monster's whereabouts. This was a knowledge lesson. After all, not all hunters had perceptual magic marks. Crossbow was only used when hunting large monsters or destroying a demon's nest. According to the young instructor, a beginner hunter only needed to master one of bow and crossbow. When an intermediate hunter became an intermediate hunter, they would learn heavy crossbow. Once they mastered the heavy crossbow, their damage would increase by several times, and they would also have the ability to fight in close combat. Once the enemy was close, they could use the heavy crossbow to shoot them back to gain more time to attack. After all, the essence of a hunter was the control of distance. If there is enough distance, then there will be enough opportunity to attack. This was what the young instructor repeatedly emphasized to Dudian, so that he would remember. Dean studied seriously. He also realized that after 300 years of development, the hunter profession within the giant wall had long been perfected. The division was extremely meticulous. During the hunter training, Dean took the time to see Jura and her husband. He saw that they had moved to the new house in the commercial district and found their respective jobs in the small town. Jura worked 8 hours a day in the medical center. Gray was the same. He worked in a tailor's shop in the small town. The income was stable and the work was very easy. It was much happier than the previous factory. He didn't have to work overtime every day. Occasionally he could take a vacation. Moreover, the salary was at least twice as much as before. Dean saw that their lives had stabilized, so he was no longer worried. A month later, he took the time to return to the slums and found Barton and Crone. After not seeing each other for a long time, they had found a remote, abandoned factory. Because it was too remote and desolate, they did not have to spend money to buy it. Instead, they bought a batch of building materials and cleaned the abandoned factory. They repaired the walls and many broken workbenches. Dean thought that they had gone their separate ways after such a long time. He didn't expect that they were still busy with the things he had told them. He was touched and trusted them more. Here are 100 gold coins. The main purpose of Dean's return was to let them collect materials. This is the list of materials. You can buy them and pile them up here. The quantity is written on it. Barton and others looked at the big bag of gold coins in Dean's hand. Their eyes lit up as they swallowed their saliva. Barton said, Dean, where did you get this money? How come you have so much? I risked my life to get it. How else could I get it? Dean smiled. Barton and the others glanced at each other, thinking that he was right. Crone's face turned red as he looked at the list. Dean, there are some words that we don't know. Dean thought for a moment and said, Well, you should study first. Once you know more words, you can drop out of school and work for me. But the tuition. Barton hesitated. Crone touched him. Dean laughed. Of course I will pay for the tuition. I will leave the money with you and you can distribute it among yourselves. Although 100 gold coins was a large number, but it was nothing for him. Moreover, he wanted to quickly cultivate Barton and others. First of all, he wanted them to have the ability to manage money and restrain their desire for money. If they had run away with 100 gold coins, Dean could have withdrawn early. Hearing Dean's words, several people's eyes lit up with excitement. Barton was happy but hesitated. It's a lot of money. If we lose it, it depends on your ability. Dudian laughed. They looked at each other with a solemn expression. After lunch, Dean went back to the commercial district by car. In his heart there was still some worry. Although Barton and others were alert and clever, but they were too young and needed to be cultivated. At the same time, he had to prepare a way out for himself. In addition to the daily and boring hunter training, Dean would go to the magistrate once a month to avoid being disqualified as a trainee. Dean would see Jenny every time he went to the magistrate. Every time he chatted with this girl, Dean would feel very good. It was as if he had found another version of himself. He found that Jenny was completely different from other noble girls. She was not snobbish at all, and her character was very easygoing. From hobbies to ideals, they talked about almost everything. Dean came to the magistrate more often. Sometimes he would come 3 to 4 times a month or even more. In the blink of an eye, more than half a year had passed. Dean came out of the magistrate's office on Puss Avenue. He looked at the gray sky. It was the black snow season, so the air was particularly cold. The particles in the thick radioactive clouds blocked the sun. Even during the daytime, the weather was gray. From time to time, black snowflakes would fall on the houses and the street. The passers-by were scared and hurried to avoid them. Black snow was the same as the disaster rain. It was an existence that people avoided. The wind outside is so strong. Jenny, who came out from the back, tightened her woolen coat, and her rosy cheeks immediately faded a little. Dean saw her pale face and felt sorry for her. He took off his coat and put it on her shoulders. He asked, "Are you still cold?" Jenny was a little anxious and quickly said, "Put it on quickly, you'll freeze." "I'm not cold." Dean smiled and felt warm in his heart. "You are a liar." Jenny bit her lower lip. There was a layer of mist in her eyes. She said, "The last time it rained you covered me from the rain, but you got wet. The result was that you got sick the next day." Dean froze for a moment. He didn't expect her to remember this matter. It was 3 months ago. It was the Black Death season. The temperature was extremely high and there was very little rain. That day was Jenny's vacation day. The two had an appointment to go out to play, but it suddenly rained. He didn't expect that with his physique, he would catch a cold. It could be seen that even if he had the physique of a hunter, he would have to retreat in the face of the rain. "Why are you so good to me?" Jenny grabbed Dean's clothes and looked up at him. Dean looked at her sparkling eyes. His heart was warm. He couldn't help but say, "Because I like you." After that, he felt his heartbeat stop. The whole world seemed to be quiet in an instant. He couldn't help but feel a trace of regret in his heart. But he was more nervous and looking forward to it. Jenny didn't expect Dean to suddenly confess. She was stunned for a moment. Her cheeks suddenly turned crimson. She lowered her head and whispered, "I like you too." Dean's hearing was very good. He felt as if his brain was going to explode. Endless joy rushed into his mind. His blood seemed to be boiling. He felt that the cold wind outside was as warm as the spring breeze. He was surprised. "Really?" Jenny saw Dean's excited and happy appearance. Her cheeks became redder, but she didn't avoid it. She softly said, "Yes." Dean suddenly felt unprecedented happiness. It was as if he was surrounded by the whole world. He held the girl tightly in his arms and smelled the faint fragrance of her hair. His heart was full of emotions. After a long time, the two separated. "I'll send you back," Dean said happily. Jenny's face was still red. She gently nodded. Dean looked at the carriage and knights waiting for Jenny in the distance. There was a trace of a smile in his eyes. "But we have to take a detour." Then he took Jenny's hand and went around to the side to sneak away. Jenny's face became redder. She closely followed him. That night, Dean sent Jenny to the front of the castle. He waited for her to enter the castle before returning to his residence. He was excited along the way. He couldn't wait to punch a few times in the carriage or immediately find a bow and arrow to shoot thousands of arrows. Half a month later, Jenny was sorting out books in the library of the magistrate in Phillips Avenue. This was her job as a trainee priest. Dean was also here, standing on the ladder, helping her to sort the books and put them on the bookshelf. After sorting out the books, Dean went down the ladder and whispered to Jenny, "I have a surprise for you. Close your eyes first." Jenny was puzzled. But seeing Dean's smiling face, she slowly closed her eyes. Her eyelashes trembled slightly. She looked very beautiful under the faint beam of light. Dean took out something from his pocket and put it in front of her eyes. "You can open your eyes now." Jenny opened her eyes and saw a jade bracelet. She was pleasantly surprised. "How do you know that I like jade?" "You mentioned it 2 months ago." Dean laughed. Jenny took the jade bracelet. Her body slightly trembled as she heard Dean's words. She tiptoed and quickly kissed Dean's cheek. Dean was stunned. He covered his face. His heart was pounding and his blood was pumping. Jenny blushed and lowered her head. Dean excitedly looked at her. He was about to hug her when his face suddenly changed. He hurriedly said, "Someone is coming." Jenny was also shocked. She quickly put away the bracelet and turned around to quickly sort out the book. Dean grabbed the ladder and adjusted the angle. After a moment, a young priest came and looked at Dean and Jenny. "Do you know where the history of the slave law is?" Dean raised his hand and pointed. "It's on that shelf." "Oh, thanks." The young man turned his head, took a look, and casually said before leaving. Dean and Jenny looked at each other and snickered. Burong family's castle. One of them was a very spacious and luxurious room. There were 2 rows of tall bookshelves filled with books. There were some antique porcelain and carvings next to them. There were rare oil paintings on the wall. At the moment, a middle-aged figure was sitting on the sofa. He was holding a book in his hand. He looked at the middle-aged butler in front of him. "I heard that Miss has been very close to a trainee priest recently?" The middle-aged butler heard the dull tone of his voice. He was a little scared. "Yes, master." "Go and investigate the background of that person." The middle-aged figure indifferently said, "Yes." The middle-aged butler quickly complied. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Dean stood on the side of the street, patiently waiting for Moss's arrival. Suddenly, a familiar smell floated into his nose. His eyes lit up. After a moment, he saw an exquisite carriage coming from the end of the street and stopped in front of Dean. Jenny jumped out of the carriage and threw herself into Dean's arms. She happily said, "I have good news for you. Do you want to hear it?" Dean held her body and laughed. "What's the good news?" "It's a great thing." Jenny blinked her eyes. She couldn't suppress the excitement on her face. "My father agreed to let us be together." "Agreed?" Dean was surprised. When Jenny's father knew that he and Jenny were together, he sent people to make him leave. They threatened him and tempted him with a lot of money. But Dean didn't agree. Because of his identity as a trainee priest, the other side didn't use brutal means. Later on, the matter was left unsettled. Now, after so long, the other side agreed? Looking at Dean's skeptical expression, Jenny nodded. "My father said that he refused you before not because you are a civilian, but because he was worried that you are useless. You can't be a priest or a hunter. So he said that this time he will personally arrange a hunting task for you. If you can complete it, he will agree to let us be together." "Personally arrange a hunting task for me?" Dean slightly frowned. His heart felt a trace of unease. His identity as a hunter had long been known by the other side. If he didn't have the protection of a trainee priest, it was estimated that he would have been forcibly separated by the other side. Jenny saw Dean's worried expression and laughed. "You can rest assured that my father said that he will never arrange a task that is too difficult for you. But I don't know the specific task. If you think it is difficult, you can tell me. If my father is deliberately making things difficult for you, see if I don't find him to settle accounts." "Well," Dean nodded. He hoped so. Chapter 137. After the completion of this task, you don't have to be a hunter anymore, okay? Jenny looked up at Dean, full of expectation. Now a year had passed. She knew that Dean was no longer a scavenger, but a hunter. Although she was not interested in the consortium's business, but more or less she knew that the hunter's duty was to clear the dangers outside the giant wall. In the past, she would unconditionally support Dean to do what he wanted to do. But now the feelings were deep. She did not want to see Dean leave the giant wall again when she thought that Dean would encounter danger. Looking at her hopeful eyes, Dean's heart softened. He nodded. Okay. Jenny couldn't help but be overjoyed. She hugged him tightly and buried her head in his arms. In the future we will be magistrates. We will be together every day. How happy it will be. Dean's heart was full of yearning when he heard her words. The more he fell in love with this girl, the more he did not want to face the life outside the giant wall. He even did not want to practice archery. When he was shooting, his mind was full of her figure. It was difficult to concentrate his thoughts. He just wanted to accompany her every day and look at her forever. Since the two fell in love 6 months ago, Dean would go to the magistrate to accompany Jenny back to her home every day after completing his training. Whenever Jenny had a holiday, he would take a leave to accompany her to play around. In such a life, he found himself tired of the boring archery practice. Even the alchemy factory that was ready was abandoned. He did not go back to visit for a long time. Dean felt tired every time he thought of his ideals and ambitions. He just wanted to accompany the girl every day. He did not want to go outside the giant wall and train hard. My father will give you a task in a few days. You go back and prepare for it. I won't bother you. Jenny raised her head from Dean's chest and looked at him. Dean smiled and said, You are quite sensible. Of course, Jenny proudly said. Dean also felt that he needed to prepare well. Since the other party had given him this opportunity, he had to grasp it. If the task was beyond his ability, he would decisively refuse. But if it was just a little difficult, he was willing to fight to prove to Jenny's father that he was worthy of his daughter's life. 2 days later, Dean received a notice that he was assigned to the third team to carry out a mission outside the giant wall. The content of the mission was to head to Zone 2 and slay the named monster of Zone 2. Corpse Eater. Corpse Eater. Dean frowned as he read the content of the mission. The captain of the third team is an intermediate hunter and a knight. The ghoul's hunting level is 18. With the captain's strength, he should be able to resist 1 or 2 of them. With the cooperation of the others and me, the chance of killing it should be about 60%. During this year of training, he had taken the time to read the atlas of the monsters outside the giant wall. It was said that this atlas was passed down from the inner wall. It recorded the basic information of the various monsters outside the giant wall. Moreover, according to this information, he was able to evaluate the hunting level of the monsters. In the long history of development, there would be some deviation between the hunting level and the actual combat power of the monsters in the early days, but now the deviation was very small. It was basically in line with the estimated hunting level, and the deviation would not be more than 1 level. After thinking for a moment, Dean immediately decided to execute it. Although it was difficult, but it was not without hope. Dean packed his luggage. He put the detonator that he had secretly prepared 6 months ago into his bag. It might be useful in a critical moment. After all, the fortress in Area Number 7 should have been scavenged by now. Basically, there wouldn't be anything left. When Dean came to the Hunter's Hall, he immediately saw the third team. There were a total of 4 people, including him. This was the standard size of a team. Moreover, the position allocation was also very particular. Each team must have a knight or a defensive warrior, and the same was true for hunters. The remaining 3 vacancies could be filled at will, either 2 thieves or 3 knights. Are you Dean? Among the 4 people, a tall youth took the initiative to ask when he saw Dean. Dean said apologetically, Sorry, I'm late. Another female hunter in her early 20s was carrying a crossbow on her back. She looked at the newcomer and could not help but say, What is going on? The people above have drunk too much. This is assessed as an intermediate task. How could they let a rookie join the mission? Do they think our lives are worth shit? That's right, Captain. Could the higher-ups have made a mistake? Another warrior carrying a giant sword said. From the shape of the sword, it was clear that most of them were defensive swordsmen, not offensive swordsmen like Linda. This is the decision of the top. Don't talk about it. Get ready to go. The tall youth slightly waved his hand to stop the two from continuing to talk. He said to Dean, I heard that your magic marks are fear. The task of tracking the ghouls will be handed over to you. Dean nodded. No problem. The female hunter and the young swordsman were stunned for a moment when they heard the captain's words. They looked at each other but didn't continue to say anything. They just coldly snorted. There was still a bit of dissatisfaction in their eyes. Soon, everyone got on the horse. The tall youth captain took the lead and went out of the giant wall. After a few hours of travel, they passed through the radiation zone and arrived in front of the giant wall. In front of the passage, there were people from the Melon Consortium waiting for them. When they saw Dean and others, they immediately greeted and helped to open the passage. As they passed through the dark passage, Dean followed the others. As usual, he stopped in front of the goddess of the hunt engraved on the wall and prayed. Then he left the passage and came to the outside of the giant wall. This passage was different from the passage that Dean had used to go to Area Number 1. Outside was not a giant forest, but a desolate plain. The ground was full of rubble. Under the rubble, the outline of the foundation of the building was faintly visible. Let's go. It was obviously not the first time for the tall youth to come here. After a quick glance, he confirmed that there was no danger around. He took out a map from his backpack and looked at it. He took the lead to lead the way. Dean, the female hunter, the swordsman, and the other thief followed closely behind. Rookie, if you smell any dangerous smell, remember to remind us, the swordsman said to Dean. Dean frowned but didn't say anything. The ghouls' favorite area of activity is the carrion swamp on the north side. The tall youth said to the crowd, Hurry up. There are traces of other monsters wandering nearby. It's a big guy. Chapter 138. Under the leadership of the tall youth, they quickly moved forward in the rubble. Along the way they saw some huge footprints, which were about the size of a bathtub. It was not difficult to imagine what kind of giant creature passed by here. 81 Chinese network. Dean smelled the residual smell on the footprint. Through the tracking of the smell, he smelled the source of the smell in the distance of about 25 to 30 miles. It was extremely strong and moving slowly. The tall youth flew in the opposite direction of the footprints with Dean and others. They came to a broken street and stopped, saying, Let's take a break. Dean, come over and look at the map. We have to rely on you to track the ghoul. Dean heard the words and went forward to look. Suddenly, the tall youth suddenly turned around, pulled out a dagger, and violently stabbed Dean's chest. This sudden change shocked Dean. Clang! A sharp sound echoed. Dean flew out and fell to the ground. The tall youth was a little stunned. He looked at Dean's chest. The black hunting armor had been pierced, but the inside was extremely hard, like a layer of steel plate. This sudden turn of events left the huntress, swordsman, and thief completely dumbfounded. Captain! The female hunter was a little confused. Dean was horrified. He looked at the tall youth incredulously. The next moment, he suddenly thought of an idea. His whole body suddenly turned cold. He quickly climbed up from the ground, turned around and ran. The hunting mission this time was simply a pretense. Or the target of the hunt was not the ghoul, but him. The tall youth saw Dean escape, and hurriedly said to the swordsman and the other two, Catch him. This is the consortium's task. We must kill him. The swordsman and the other two looked at each other, but did not move. The tall youth didn't say much to them and quickly chased after Dean. He thought that after the sneak attack was successful, He would slowly explain to them. But now the sneak attack failed. If he let a newcomer like Dean run away from his hands, it would be a big joke, and it would also anger the people above. Whoosh! The tall youth ran. Although he was a knight, his flexibility was not inferior to the thief and the hunter. Dean felt that the figure behind him was getting closer and closer. He was frightened. He had no chance of winning against an intermediate hunter. He hurriedly threw out the life bag on his back. Although there was a detonator inside, it was too late to ignite. It was just a burden. Run! Dean ran for his life. Whoosh! Suddenly, a sound of breaking wind swept over. When Dean heard the sound of the wind, he instinctively wanted to look back, but an alarm sounded in his mind. He couldn't look back, and his body took the lead to hide to the side. Although he dodged quickly, a piercing pain still came from his back. It was as if a truck had hit him from behind. His body involuntarily fell forward and rolled several times on the ground. At this time, Dean saw that the tall youth was quickly catching up. He also saw the tip of the spear from his back to his abdomen. Ah! Dean's eyes were red. Enduring the pain, he pulled out the spear from his back. Blood gushed out and sputtered on the ground. Humph! The tall youth coldly snorted, quickly rushed in front of Dean, and kicked. Dean suddenly rolled sideways, grabbed a handful of mud and threw it at the tall youth's face. The tall youth hurriedly raised his hand to block, but his foot stepped on empty air. When he looked again, Dean had climbed up and continued to run forward. Damn brat! The tall youth gritted his teeth, grabbed the spear that was thrown on the ground by Dean, aimed at the running Dean, and threw it. Dean covered the wound on his abdomen and endured the pain. Although he was running, his mind was always paying attention to the back. Seeing that the other side picked up the spear, he immediately knew that the other side was going to throw the spear again. He immediately endured the fear and continued to run along the straight line. Then suddenly, he rolled to the side to dodge. With a whoosh, the moment he dodged, the spear whizzed past him and shot into the distance. Dean's wildly beating heart was slightly relieved. Then he gritted his teeth and ran to the side of the street. The tall youth froze for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect Dean to suddenly dodge. Originally, he saw Dean running in a straight line, so he thought that the spear would hit. Who would have expected that the other side's action turned out to deliberately lead him to misjudge? Damn it! The tall youth reacted and suddenly became angry. He no longer picked up the spear and quickly chased after Dudian. Dean only felt the pain in his abdomen. In the process of running, it seemed that something was constantly leaking out of his body, which made his heart feel frightened. He could only cover his abdomen more tightly. What should I do? What should I do? Dean was a little flustered. He knew that sooner or later he would be caught. Just now, he used the opponent's spear to pull away a little bit. But the opponent was, after all, an intermediate hunter. The distance between them was too close. It was impossible to get rid of him. Whoosh! The tall youth rushed to catch up. He looked at Dean in front of him, who was covering his abdomen with one hand and running in the air with the other. His heart was angry and somewhat frightened. Such speed was by no means a newcomer could have. Dean was faster than many junior hunters, and not much inferior to him. The two of them ran on the street covered with moss, water, and mud. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Soon, Dean smelled the opponent's scent. He was 3 or 4 meters behind him, and it was already within reach. Is this the end? A trace of despair flashed in Dean's heart. In vain, he saw a puddle on the side of the road in front of him. This was a collapsed street filled with accumulated rain. Fallen leaves and dark rotten things were floating on top of it. The water was muddy. Dean gritted his teeth and jumped. With a splash, he fell into the puddle. The tall youth stretched out his hand to grab the air. He was slightly stunned and quickly stopped. Looking at the puddle of 7 or 8 square meters, His eyes became gloomy. I wanted to leave you a whole body, but you actually courted death. You let the monster in the sewer take advantage of you. He looked at the water and waited. 10 seconds later, a lot of blood floated up from the muddy water. Dean plunged into the puddle. The first thing he felt was cold. The puddle was deep. He swam quickly and drilled into the puddle, for fear that the tall youth would also jump in. After swimming for a while, Dean suddenly saw a black shadow, quietly and quickly swimming towards him. There were almost no fluctuations in the water as it swam. An underwater monster. Dean's pupils shrank. He suddenly remembered that this was a sewer. Now that it was filled with water, there must be a lot of monsters living in the sewer for a long time. Thinking of this, his heart was cold. At this time, the black shadow was about 4 or 5 meters away from him. It swam quickly like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. Dean tried to open his eyes. In the muddy water, he only felt pain in his eyes, but he still did not dare to close them. Suddenly, he saw the appearance of the black shadow. It turned out to be a crocodile-like monster. Its whole body was covered with fish scales. Its front mouth was extremely long. There were 6 extremely sharp claws under its abdomen. It was estimated that it could instantly tear a human body apart. Dean kicked the water and wanted to escape in horror. But the opponent's underwater speed was too fast. It rushed forward and fiercely bit Dean's left leg with its big mouth full of sharp teeth. A sharp pain came from his left leg. Dean painfully shook his leg, but the opponent tightly bit him. He suddenly thought of the dagger beside his leg. He hurriedly took it out and madly bent down to stab the monster's head. The dagger stabbed down again and again. The monster's tail shook violently in pain, and the surrounding water surged. Dean crazily stabbed, and a lot of blood floated out of the monster's head. It didn't take long for the monster's tight bite to loosen its strength. Dean hurriedly opened its upper and lower jaws and pulled out his leg. At the same time, he felt a sense of suffocation in his chest. Knowing that his holding time was almost up, he hurriedly looked around. Soon, Dean found a hole in the wall and hurriedly swam toward it. The hole was a drain leading to the sewer. Dean pulled the rotting steel bars across the hole. The steel bars were broken with a gentle pull. Dean immediately drilled into the hole. The hole was facing upwards. Dean looked inside for a moment and finally surfaced. He couldn't help but gasp for breath. At the same time, he saw the surrounding environment. It turned out to be a moss-covered toilet. The tall youth looked at the water in the puddle. As the water surged, a lot of blood floated out and dyed the turbid water light red. At this time, the hunter and others caught up and looked at the blood in the puddle. They looked at the tall youth in bewilderment. "Captain, why?" The tall man tilted his head to look at them and said indifferently, "This is a mission from the higher-ups, and it's from the blonde family. Each of you will be given 1,000 gold coins to keep your mouths shut. You'd better not leak what happened today, or I won't be able to protect you." The hunter and the other 2 looked at each other. Dean didn't dare to break the toilet. The distance between him and the tall youth was less than 20 meters. It was easy to alarm the tall youth. He vaguely remembered that there were several collapsed buildings nearby. He should have come to one of the buildings along the sewer. He gently gasped. He didn't dare to let his breath be too loud. His body was still soaked in the water. His palms were tightly covering the side of his abdomen. After soaking in the water, he felt that the wound on his back was getting more and more painful. It seemed that blood was constantly flowing out of it. After a moment, Dean smelled the scent of the hunter and others. He immediately held his breath and sank his head into the water again. He didn't dare to make the slightest movement. He was afraid that they had perceptive magic marks and could find his position. When he couldn't hold his breath again, Dean carefully floated his head out of the water. He controlled his chest to slowly inhale a trace of air. At the same time, he smelled their scent. He felt that they were still in front of the puddle. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He faintly felt that it was too dangerous here. He immediately took a deep breath and sank into the water. He continued to swim along the previous hole. He secretly prayed that he wouldn't encounter underwater monsters again. He swam along the wall of the sewer. Although the light inside was dim, fortunately, his vision wasn't affected by the darkness. After swimming for more than 10 meters, he saw a huge seaweed-like monster in the distance. Its whole body was floating like seaweed-like tentacles. The monster seemed to smell the blood on his body. It immediately swam over slowly. Dean was scared and stopped in a hurry. He looked around and saw another hole similar to the previous one. He immediately drilled into it. After entering this passage, Dean quickly swam up. The position exposed to the water was still a toilet, but this toilet had long been smashed. The surroundings were flat. Dean saw a rotten and dark skeleton not far away. The ground was full of rotten dust and some unknown monster feces. At this time, Dean smelled the smell of the tall youth and others in front of the puddle. He turned back along the original road. It seemed that they were worried about the underwater monster and gave up jumping in to search. After all, Dean was seriously injured and there was blood on his body. The hope of surviving underwater was close to zero. Moreover, although these hunters often went outside the giant wall to hunt monsters, they didn't know the structure under the ruins of the city. Dean quietly felt that they had gone far away. His tense heart also relaxed. At this moment, he felt pain in his feet. Then countless cold and soft things wrapped around his legs and climbed all the way to his upper body. Dean suddenly thought of the seaweed-like underwater monster. He was scared and hurriedly climbed out of the toilet. Although the area under the toilet was very small, the surrounding ground had been soaked in water. The concrete had long been rotten. Dean pushed hard and broke a hole. He crawled out and looked back. He saw that the tentacles of the seaweed-like monster were like green snake. The top of the tentacles opened a sharp mouth and gnawed his body. Fortunately, he had the hunter armor to block, so he wasn't bitten too seriously. Dean felt numb. He held the dagger and madly stabbed it. The monster was in pain. The green snake-like tentacles bit Dean's face. Dean hurriedly waved the dagger and cut it off. The monster screamed in pain. The tentacles wrapped around Dean's body suddenly retracted. Its body slid into the puddle near the toilet. Blood floated on the surface of the water. Dean was relieved when he saw that the monster was scared away. He didn't dare to stay here any longer. He carefully climbed out of the collapsed building. "I have to deal with the wound as soon as possible." Dean felt the pain in his thighs and back. His face was ugly, but he didn't dare to stay in the vicinity for a long time. He didn't want the monster to suddenly turn back. He took off the hunter armor and threw it into the roadside water. Then he took out a soaked gauze from the first aid kit and wrapped it around the wound. He found some vines and green leaves and crushed them. He let the plant juice mix with the bloody smell to suppress the spread of the blood. Then he washed the blood off the hunter armor and smeared mud on it. He put it on his body. The smell of rotten mud wafted from his body. "I have to leave here as soon as possible. Once I'm targeted by a large monster, I'll be dead." Dean was very nervous. Concealing the smell was a relatively safer method. But in front of some level hunter monsters, this kind of camouflage was useless. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean appeared at the border of Area Number 2. From the surrounding buildings, he could vaguely see the flag of the Melon Consortium. There was also the emblem of fuel sprayed on the ground. It symbolized that this was the territory of the Melon Consortium. In front is Area Number 9. From Area Number 6 I can go to Area Number 9. Dean crossed a flag, clutched his abdomen, and limped into Area Number 6. In the past 2 days, he almost didn't dare to clean the wounds on his body. All the first aid items on his body were soaked in the water and lost their effect. Only a few bottles of hemostatic medicine had a little effect. but the wound was infected by the water and had rotted. He had to cut off the wound and bandage it. Cutting off the festering tissue also meant that there would be a bloody smell. In a dangerous area like Area Number 2, Dean could only endure the rotting of the wound. He only hoped to return to Area Number 9 as soon as possible. It was the closest safe area to him. I didn't expect that his purpose was to kill me and not to test me. Dean's heart was full of pain and sadness. He thought that his father-in-law was really merciful. Like Jenny said, he didn't despise his civilian identity. He didn't expect that he was too naive and overestimated his value. In the eyes of the other, he may be a humble worm. How could he allow such a worm to drag down his daughter? This matter Jenny shouldn't know. Dean recalled Jenny's happy appearance before leaving. From her every move, it was obvious that she was kept in the dark. This made his heart feel a lot better. Before returning to the giant wall, I have to improve my strength as soon as possible. Otherwise, he will send consortium assassins to assassinate me. Even the magistrate won't be able to help me. At most, the consortium will lose an assassin. Dean secretly said, "As long as I am careful of his plot, even if he is a noble, he has no right to kill me. After all, the magistrate has executed nobles in the history of the magistrate. He won't dare to take such a risk. When the time comes, I will promote the position of the clergyman and take Jenny away." Dean secretly calculated. Chapter 139. 3 days later. At the border of Melon Consortium's 9th area, a dirty and muddy figure drilled out of the grass. He looked around and saw that there was no danger. He carefully groped his way out. He stepped barefoot on the moss and limped into the ruins of the street in front of him. Finally back to the 9th area. Dean's tense body finally got a little breathing space. In the past few days, if he didn't rely on his sense of smell to detect monsters and undeads in advance, it was estimated that hundreds of lives would have been lost. Even so, he almost lost his life. At night, he was attacked by a snake that knew how to hide its smell. Fortunately, he reacted in time and didn't get entangled by it. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. Following the route in his memory, Dean walked towards the place where the cold crystals were stored. Along the way, he smelled the scent of bone-biter rats from the ruins of collapsed buildings. In addition, he smelled the scent of other monsters from the entrance of the sewer. Although hunters could hunt monsters on land, they couldn't do anything to monsters underwater. Some people had tried to kill them with poison, but the water in the sewers flowed in all directions. It was estimated that even if they threw in tons of poison, they might not be able to kill the monsters. Moreover, with the mutation of the monsters, if they were not killed immediately, they might evolve again and become more terrible. After a moment, Dean found his hiding place. He lifted the stone and found the cold crystals and rotten guns wrapped inside. Dean put the guns aside and opened the package of cold crystals. Looking at the crystal, he couldn't help but think of its original name, Soul Crystal. Perhaps this was really the soul of the undeads? Dean shook his head and put away his thoughts. He lifted his left sleeve and held the dagger. Suddenly, there was some hesitation in his heart. If it was not necessary, he really didn't want to absorb the cold crystals to enhance his strength. He always felt that something bad would happen. However, now he was forced into a desperate situation. If he didn't enhance his strength, he couldn't return to the giant wall. If he stayed outside for a long time, the radiation in his body would increase sharply. Dean gritted his teeth and cut a wound on his wrist. He picked up a cold crystal and immediately blocked the wound. The next moment, he saw that the cold crystal was like ice and snow in boiling water. It gradually melted and turned into a translucent viscous liquid. It slowly penetrated into the wound on his arm. In the blink of an eye, a cold crystal the size of a ping-pong ball disappeared from the bloodstain. Dean felt the cold crystal near the bloodstain was full of power. He gritted his teeth and picked up the second cold crystal to continue to absorb. After the second one disappeared, Dean continued to absorb the third one, fourth one. In the blink of an eye, 90 cold crystals had entered his left hand and disappeared. His arm didn't show any signs of swelling or any other signs. Dean looked at the remaining 10 pills in the bag. He immediately picked them up and pressed them on the bloodstains. The cold crystal slowly melted and flowed into his arm. When Dean grabbed another one, he suddenly felt a cold air coming from the bloodstain on his left hand. At the same time, a swollen discomfort came from his left hand and stomach. He felt nausea and vomiting. His brain also felt a trace of fatigue and dizziness. He had experienced such a reaction last time when he absorbed the cold crystal. He knew that he had reached the limit. He immediately let go of the cold crystal in his hand and stopped absorbing. He hugged his left arm and leaned against the wall, quietly waiting for the uncomfortable reaction to subside. However, this time it didn't go as Dean expected. The uncomfortable feeling of dizziness and vomiting, as well as the bone-chilling feeling, not only didn't weaken, but became more and more intense. Dean felt like he was in the black snow season, surrounded by endless ice and snow. He was so cold that he was shivering. Caca. Suddenly, Dean heard the bone-chilling sound of ice. He looked at the source of the sound and suddenly turned pale. He saw that his left hand had started to freeze from the fingertips. Moreover, the frozen ice slowly spread along the fingers to the palm, and then the wrist. Looking at the trend, it seemed to spread along the left hand to the whole body. Dean was frightened and hurriedly covered the frozen part of his left wrist. Suddenly, he felt the bone-chilling cold pouring into his right hand. The ice covered his right hand. He was scared and hurriedly pulled back his right hand. Looking at the ice still spreading up, his mind was a little blank. In this moment of panic, he suddenly thought of fire. The best way to stop the cold was to use fire. His right hand hurriedly took out the fire sickle hidden in the chest armor that he carried with him. His other hand held the fire sickle and rubbed it with all his might. Soon, sparks were ignited. He picked up the dry firewood on the ground next to him, bit the silk with his teeth, and threw it on the sparks. It gradually burned. He kept picking up the nearby fallen leaves and withered vines, stacking them on the sparks and burning them. The fire was getting bigger and bigger. However, Dean saw that on his left hand, the ice was still spreading up to his elbow. The cold feeling of his whole body was not warmed by the strong flame. Suddenly, he gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and stretched his left hand to the flame. The ice on his hand melted quickly when it met the raging fire, and there was a burst of sharp pain from his arm. The pain was not from the burning flame, but from the inside of his arm, as if it was being stabbed by countless ice knives. Dean took back his left hand and hugged it, rolling on the ground in pain. After the flames fell off his arm, the piercing pain immediately lessened. However, the ice that had stopped spreading once again followed his arm and extended towards his shoulder. This made him feel terrified. He didn't know if it would continue to spread after it reached his shoulder. If it froze his throat, he would suffocate to death. Dean gritted his teeth and raised his left hand again, grilling it on the fire. The ice gradually melted into water, dripped into the fire, evaporated into water vapor, and made a hissing sound. A bone-piercing pain came from his left hand. He was in so much pain that he wanted to scratch his scalp. He tried his best to pull his hand back, but he resisted the urge to do so. He picked up a thick piece of firewood from the ground and bit it tightly. The sharp pain made him lose all restraint, and he let out a beast-like howl from his throat. Tears were secreted from his tear ducts and flowed all over his face. Bean-sized beads of cold sweat also seeped from his forehead, mixed with tears. In such a painful endurance, he did not feel the passage of time. He did not know how much time had passed. Maybe it was more than 10 minutes, maybe less than a minute. Gradually, he felt the piercing pain in his left hand lessen, and then slowly he could not feel the stinging pain anymore. His eyelids trembled and slowly opened. The next moment, he saw his left hand was on fire. The hunter armor on his hand was made of animal skin, and it was burning. His arm was like a fire stick. Dean was scared and hurriedly retracted his hand. Soon, the flame was extinguished, and black smoke rose from his left hand. Dean raised his left hand and looked at it. He found that the skin of his left hand was only slightly burned, but the hunter armor on his left hand was burned to rags. He was relieved, but the next moment he was stunned. Chapter 140. Dean's heart was hanging in the air. He carefully raised his right hand and gently touched the burns on his left hand. Suddenly, he felt no sensation. 09 small say net, how could this be? Dean's face was pale. His right hand was tightly covering several burns. Through his right hand he could feel the extremely high temperature of his left hand. However, his left hand was touched by the burns, but he still felt no sensation. Impossible! Dean angrily raised his left hand and smashed it on the ground. Bang! A deep pit appeared on the ground. Dean was stunned. He raised his left hand and tried to make a fist. He saw that his fingers could move freely. When he wanted to make a fist, his left hand could make a fist. However, even if he made a fist, his left hand still couldn't feel it. He couldn't even feel the touch of his fingers on his palm. This feeling was very strange. He could clearly see the movement of his left hand and even control his left hand, but he couldn't feel his left hand being controlled by his brain. Dean gradually calmed down. He repeatedly looked at his left hand in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of the pit on the ground. He raised his left hand and grabbed the stone next to him. Bang! As soon as he grabbed it, the stone shattered in his palm. This stone was a concrete stone, and it had long been rotten. Originally, Dean wanted to smash it easily, but he absolutely didn't feel like now. He almost couldn't feel his own strength, but it was broken. Dean changed his right hand and continued to grab another stone. The touch was clear. He gently exerted force, and with a bang, the stone shattered again. Dean was suddenly relieved. It seemed that it wasn't because his left hand had lost feeling that he used too much force, but his strength had indeed improved. Dean took out the black bow from the storage next to him. This was the bow of Byrne, Linda's brother. He pinched the bowstring and just pulled it. With a bang, the bowstring suddenly broke and almost bounced on his face. Whether it's the weight of the grip or the feeling of pulling the bowstring, it's obviously light, as if it's made of straw. Dean grabbed both ends of the bow with both hands. With a little force, the black bow suddenly bent into a circle. My strength has increased, and it's more than doubled. Dean was a little excited, but when he saw the burns on his left hand, the joy in his heart suddenly disappeared. Although my strength has increased, but my left hand is equivalent to a waste. Although I can move, but the nerves inside should all be dead. I don't know if there will be other sequelae. Without the sense of touch, there will be a deviation in the grasp of power in the future. I can only rely on feeling. Thinking of this, he sighed in his heart. He continued to move his left hand, but he still couldn't feel it. He took out a dagger and heated it on the fire. He took out disinfectant and gauze from the first aid kit. After the dagger was heated, he opened his abdomen armor. He saw the hole in the side of his abdomen that was pierced by the tall youth's spear. The rotten flesh had rolled out. He gritted his teeth and used the dagger to cut off the rotten flesh on the outside of the wound. The pain made him gasp. He clenched his teeth and endured it. He suddenly hoped that these wounds could be as numb as his left hand, so he wouldn't be in so much pain. After a moment, the rotten wound on the front and back of the abdomen was cut off and rebandaged. But the wound on the back could only be cut slowly. It was extremely inconvenient. Unfortunately, he was alone at the moment. Saving oneself in the wilderness was also a compulsory course for hunters. After a while, the rotten flesh on the front and back of the abdomen were cleaned and bandaged. Next was his thigh. The hunter gauntlet was broken, and there were a few teeth holes on it. There was a circle of teeth marks on his thigh, like a row of black holes. The wound was completely rotten. Dean once again burned the dagger and endured the pain to cut off the wound piece by piece. After 10 minutes, Dean finally finished bandaging all the wounds on his body. He was in pain and tired. "I'll wait for the injury to heal a little, then I'll return to the giant wall," Dean thought. Although the outside of the giant wall was not suitable for healing, but it was also extremely dangerous to go back with such a body. However, before going back, he must go to the giant wall in advance and wait for the passage to open, so as not to miss it. Half a month later, the passage near the 9th district of the Melon Consortium was opened again. Dean thought that Peter, Mason and others would come out, but he did not expect that it would be a team of hunters. Impressively, there was the female hunter that he had seen before. The female hunter should have been assigned to this new team. When she saw Dean, she was surprised and said, "It's you." Dean's eyes narrowed. There was a trace of killing intent in his eyes. But suddenly he remembered that she, the swordsman and the thief didn't help the captain to attack him. The killing intent in his heart converged a lot as he walked towards the passage. "Hunter." The other 4 people in the team were surprised to see Dean. They didn't expect to see a new hunter here. They were relieved when they saw the incomplete badge of the Melon Consortium on Dean's armor. One of the one-eyed youth asked the female hunter, "Do you know him?" The female hunter subconsciously nodded. Her palm couldn't help but touch the dagger on her leg. Dean's height made it easy for him to see the small movements of the other party. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes. He looked up at her. As long as she dared to pull out the dagger a little bit, he would immediately attack. The female hunter didn't hold the dagger to attack, but to defend. She was worried that Dean would hold a grudge against her and attack her. Although she knew that the other was just a newcomer, but after all, he was a real primary hunter. His physique wouldn't be inferior to hers. This point could be seen from the fact that he was able to successfully escape last time. So when she saw Dean approaching her, she couldn't help but feel nervous. Dean saw that she didn't have the intention to attack, so he didn't take the initiative to attack. He passed by them and entered the passage behind them. After Dean's figure disappeared, the one-eyed youth looked at the female hunter and said, "You seem to be afraid of him? He's just a newcomer. Is it necessary?" The female hunter was relieved when she saw Dean had left. She bitterly said, "We should find the leakers who broke into the 9th district as soon as possible." The others saw that she didn't want to say more, so they didn't ask any more and went to the 9th district. Dean returned to the giant wall. According to the rules, he was once again sent to the Guardian. "I don't know if my left hand will be checked or not," Dean thought in his heart. He had absorbed too many cold crystals through his left hand. After all, these cold crystals were the crystallization of the undead's body. Now it seemed that a lot of cold crystals hadn't been digested and were frozen in his left hand. He didn't know if his left hand was the same as the undead's arm. However, he also knew that it was impossible to sneak into the commercial district. The border fortress of the commercial district was extremely strict. They almost didn't need to search when they came out, but when they went in, they had to check carefully. It could be said that it was the second checkpoint in addition to the Guardian. Moreover, this checkpoint was set up by the military. Hunters like them who wanted to enter the border fortress must get the qualified mark given by the Guardian. With this mark, they could pass through the border fortress. Dean entered the Guardian again. He was already familiar with the way. After washing his body with clean water, he put on clean clothes and sat in the cage to wait. The next day, someone came to give Dean a blood test. Dean was nervous. He stretched out his right hand to take the blood. The person didn't think much. He took out the blood from his right finger and dripped it into the bowl. There was already a drop of blood in the bowl. At the moment, as Dean's blood dripped into the bowl, the two quietly suspended in the bowl. Dean was relieved. He quietly waited for the 7 days to pass. After returning to the commercial district, I will leave the consortium's hunter establishment. I will be a trainee priest and then climb to the position of official priest. I might even be promoted to the position of deacon or bishop. At that time, I can give Jenny happiness. Dean quietly waited while planning the future. On the 4th day, the cage was opened again. Dean thought that it was other hunters. When he looked, he saw 7 or 8 people come in. 4 of them were apprentice Knights of Light. The other 4 were wearing strange uniforms. They came to Dean's cage. One of the middle-aged men shouted, "Are you Dean?" Dean was startled. He felt a trace of bad. "You are." The middle-aged man snorted. "Now on behalf of the magistrate, I will arrest you for theft. Come with me." Theft? Dean was confused. "You are mistaken. What did I steal? I am a hunter. I just came back from outside the giant wall." Dean couldn't help but say. The middle-aged man impatiently said, "Don't be long-winded. If you have anything to say, go to prison." Prison? Dean was angry. There is no interrogation and investigation. What qualifications do you have to put me in prison? My words are the qualifications. The middle-aged man sneered. Dean looked at him and said, "So, you don't have an arrest warrant?" The middle-aged man's face sank. He said in a cold voice, "Of course, but I am afraid that you will run away. Today, I will come to arrest you. After that, naturally there will be an arrest warrant." He waved his hand and said to the apprentice Knight of Light, "Open the door and handcuff me." The apprentice Knight of Light nodded. He took out the key and opened the cage. Dean didn't think that he could order the apprentice Knight of Light. His face became more gloomy. Suddenly, his heart woke up. He couldn't help but have a strong killing intent. He slowly stood up and stepped out of the cage. He looked up at the middle-aged man. "You are called by the Melon Consortium. Do you want to impose a crime on me?" The middle-aged man frowned and shouted to the person next to him, "Handcuff him." Dean didn't resist but raised his hand. He stared at the middle-aged man. "Try to handcuff me. You dare to arrest an apprentice without an arrest warrant. Even if I am in prison, even if my crime has been confirmed by you, I still have the right to sue you as an apprentice for ignoring judicial procedures and abusing law enforcement." The middle-aged man raised his hand to stop the companion who was about to handcuff Dean. He looked down at the child who was almost the same age as his son. He didn't expect such a child to be able to maintain his composure in such a situation. He was shocked but also felt a bit tricky. After a long silence, he said, "Boy, you have guts. Do you think you are worthy to call me a boy?" Dean sneered. The middle-aged man slightly frowned. He didn't want to argue with Dean. "Wait for me to get the arrest warrant tomorrow. You will see." Then he waved his hand and beckoned the few people to leave. The apprentice Knight of Light and his companions looked at each other. They didn't expect that they would be forced back by Dean. They felt a bit vexed and could only go back dejectedly. After all, no one wanted to bear unnecessary trouble. Dean looked at them leaving, but his heart didn't have the slightest joy of winning the battle. Instead, his heart was incomparably cold, full of unspeakable anger and killing intent. At the same time, he quickly thought of a way out. If they say I stole, I have sufficient alibi. Even if they maliciously frame me, there is no evidence. Although they can perjure, but many people in the consortium know that I went outside the giant wall to perform the task. There is no way to hide it. Thinking of this, his heart was a little relieved. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. Dean had just left the guardian's office when he saw a carriage and several people waiting outside. The middle-aged man was the leader of the group. Dean's heart couldn't help but sink. My 7-day period hasn't ended, but he came to arrest me. Obviously, he didn't convict me at that time. Dean thought in his heart. In the past 3 days he thought of some strange things. When he came for the first time, even if there was an arrest warrant, he didn't have the qualifications to take me away. After all, I can't leave the guardian's office even if I go to the prison. It means that he didn't want to take me to the prison, but wanted to kill me secretly. In this case, the consortium can even define my death as outside the giant wall so that the magistrate can't trace it. Dean looked at the middle-aged man who was sneering at him. His brows slightly wrinkled. Now that he dares to come over, he should have obtained an arrest warrant. But the magistrate hasn't interrogated me, so how can they give him an arrest warrant? Dean walked over and indifferently said, "Don't show the smile of a henchman. It's disgusting." The middle-aged man was startled. His face turned gloomy. "Boy, don't talk nonsense. Didn't you want an arrest warrant? I brought it for you." Then, he took out a cross-arrest warrant. Dean's heart sank, but his mouth said, "You have the courage to forge an arrest warrant at will." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment before he sneered. "Brat, you will know whether it's fake or not when the time comes. However, I have already shown you my arrest warrant. If you dare to resist, I have the right to kill you on the spot." Dean certainly wouldn't resist. Even if he wasn't guilty, he would be directly included in the wanted list. He would be wanted by the whole city. There would be no place for him in the entire giant wall. "Go." The middle-aged man opened the door of the cage and sneered at Dean. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.